All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Dean Dorton's annual higher education update with the current issues and trends. My name is Megan Crane. I'm an Associate Director of Assurance at Dean Dorton. I lead our higher education team. I'm so glad everyone is here attending with us today. This is our 10th year of training that we've done specifically focused at higher ed. And in my opinion, it's a great day to learn lots or learn a couple things and take them back and try to apply them at your organization. For those who may not be familiar with Dean Dorton, we are the largest certified public accounting and business advisory firm in the Southeast region. Of course, we have tremendous specialization in higher education. We have offices in the Fort Wright, Cincinnati area, Indianapolis, Lexington, Louisville, and Raleigh, but serve clients nationally. Before we kick off our event with Liz Clark, I'd like to take a few minutes to walk through the agenda and some housekeeping items with you guys. We are using Conferences.io today for CPE attendance. You'll need to either scan in via the QR code or enter the addresses you see there into your browser and navigate to it. Throughout the seminar, we'll be using code words, and the code words will flash on the screen for about 60 seconds, and you'll need to hit submit. All code words are required to receive CPE credit throughout the entire presentation. If you are not attending for CPE or don't enter the code words, you will not receive your certificate. Make sure at the end of the session, you will be prompted to sign out. Please do so accordingly. We'll give everybody a second. Everybody's probably grabbing their phones and reaching, trying to scan the QR code. So we'll make sure you get enough time to get that in. Our agenda today includes a keynote from Liz Clark at NACUBO with a Washington and policy update, a small break. The first break will be the one where we announce the winner of our prize, which is a Yeti cooler. So that's exciting. And then session 2 will be cybersecurity, compliance, and higher education, another break. And then you'll get me at the end of the day wrapping out strategies and best practices for financial stability. We do have polling in some sessions, really just my session at the end of the day. And so this is how you join the polling. You can either text Dean Dorton to number 22333. You can go to the internet with polleverywhere.com, or you can join via the QR code, whatever is best for you. This will also be in any session so in my session later today, this same directions will come back up. So you'll get a chance to use that then. Oh, sorry, I forgot Julia, our master of ceremonies here wants us to practice. So if you can go ahead and respond to this first poll, a good test here. What's your favorite color? Red, blue, yellow, green, or other? Great. The numbers are changing, so it looks like it's working, which is what we want to see. If you do have any technical issues throughout, you can email Julia Ray, jray@deandorton.com. She should be able to help you. We will also be monitoring the chat if something were to happen there. Of course, we hope that you have questions throughout the sessions. And if you do, you can drop those also in the chat, which is you click on the icon at the top of Teams and then the chat should pop up to the side. We will get the polling link dropped in there. Yes, I'm already seeing questions come in. That's great. Next, CPE credit. Of course, you have to be an active participant. All of the code words are required to be submitted. If you can answer the polling questions, that would be great. And then keep this session pulled up on your main screen. Additionally, your CPE certificate will be available and sent to you within 2 weeks. If for some reason you don't receive it in 2 weeks, you're welcome to reach out to Julia Ray, and she will help you track that down. CPE credit today is for a total of 3.5 hours. So that's awesome for the afternoon, in my opinion. Oh, spoiler, I did talk about the door prize earlier when we were going through the agenda. So we'll be drawing for an attendee to win this midday, and it'll ship right to you. Again, if you have any questions, there's Julia's contact information, jray@deandorton.com. You'll also see her name pulling up in the chat for you to, if you have questions. All right. With that, I would like to take a moment to introduce Liz Clark. Liz is our first speaker. She's a vice president for policy and research at NACUBO and a member of NACUBO's executive leadership group. I'm sure most people in this session have sat and listened to Liz advise on all things Washington, D.C. and policy updates, so we're thrilled to have her with us here. She has been widely quoted in the press and is a sought-after speaker on how Washington politics and federal policies impact higher education. Liz got her start on Capitol Hill, opening Cornell University's first Washington, D.C. based federal relations office. Also in her career, she has led federal affairs for the State University of New York system and Oregon State University. At NACUBO, she heads the team responsible for analysis of federal regulatory and legislative actions, research, and data analytics. All right, Liz, you ready to take it from here?
Let's rock and roll, Megan.
All right.
Let's get started. All righty. I am just trying to make sure that I have control of the slides here. All right. All righty. Hello, everyone, and hello from NACUBO. I'm Liz Clark, and very happy to be here with you today. We're going to talk about what's happening in Washington and how it's impacting colleges and universities across the country. And there are certainly no shortage of issues to discuss here today. So I just wanted to share with you, sorry folks, I'm just trying to make sure that I have the right slide up here. There we go. All righty. So NACUBO has been responding to a significant number of press inquiries related to all of the policies being put forward in Washington. In fact, in the month of April, there wasn't a day that went by when NACUBO wasn't in some media, newspaper, website somewhere talking about issues, many about college and university endowments, about the endowment tax proposal on Capitol Hill. But other issues on the table have been on the question of tax-exempt status for colleges and universities, on the use of tax-exempt bonds, whether they're municipal bonds or private activity bonds. And with the policies coming out of the White House and the Trump administration and emerging from Capitol Hill, I think a lot of readers and frankly a lot of journalists are only just starting to understand the complex layers of the relationship between the federal government and colleges and universities. They're trying to understand what nonprofit status means, how it relates to being tax exempt, how it relates to access to the municipal bond market, how it relates to being able to accept charitable contributions, and how it relates to the ability to impact endowments. And all of these issues are being impacted by Washington. And we'll talk about them as we go along here. One kind of basic 101 that I just want to spend a minute or two on here is on executive orders, because I think starting with January 20th, 2025, news started coming out of Washington impacting your institutions that were a part of executive orders. And we've seen a lot of news come out of the White House and these orders and a lot of individuals not really understanding what it means. And there are a few things that folks should understand about these executive orders. First of all, President Trump is not the first president to issue executive orders. Previous presidents have used these to establish priorities and policy direction from the White House in administration after administration. The President of the United States may use executive orders to direct how federal agencies implement projects, programs, spending to some extent. They can be used to create task forces. They can be used to change the structures of agencies. This is nothing new, and it is nothing new for a president to test the powers, test the authority that he has under these executive orders. Previous presidents have tested the authority they have with certain executive orders. However, the executive orders cannot alter the Constitution of the United States, and they do not direct the federal spending outside of the parameters that Congress has set for federal spending. They also cannot overturn Supreme Court rulings. So while a president may use an executive order, they cannot subvert current law. And so it's important to understand that previous presidents have tested the authority here. President Trump is certainly testing the authority that he has in some of these executive orders. And what we are also contending with is that there's a significant volume of executive orders that frankly has been breathtaking and a real challenge to try to keep up with. And that is part of what is creating so much turbulence for colleges and universities. And when I say turbulence, what do I mean? Many of you are presently at a college or university, and you have likely seen some of the impact of this turbulence. There are executive orders, those administrative actions. There are new memos from the Office of Management and Budget. There are new memos from the leadership of federal agencies. So these are all actions taken by the executive branch or the administration here in Washington. There is also pending legislation on Capitol Hill coming out of Congress that will impact your institution and your work, particularly in the tax compliance area down the road. Those executive orders, as I said, they are testing the authority of the president. And because they are testing the authority of the president, we are seeing parties object and taking the federal government to court, objecting to how far the president is stretching the authority that he believes he has from the White House. And then there's the pressure from the public sentiment and how the public is responding to all of this. And this is playing out over a number of areas. We are seeing a lot of challenges when it comes to federal grants and contracts. So most of the volume of federal grants and contracts are with large research universities. That is where faculty have competed for and won the privilege of being able to conduct research on behalf of the federal government. These relationships exist with the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, NASA, NOAA, NIST, USDA. There are all sorts of relationships and, frankly, federal and university partnerships that exist across the federal government. Because leaders in the Trump administration have deemed some of those grants and contracts to be supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and deem them as going against policies established in executive orders that were issued on day one of President Trump's administration, some of these grants and contracts have been canceled due to those purposes. There have been other terminations based on changes in priority of this administration, and there is agency upheaval across the board. Many of you have heard of the layoffs happening at the federal government. There has been a significant reduction in force at federal agencies, from the Department of Education to the National Science Foundation to the National Institutes of Health. And this upheaval is challenging and changing those relationships that an individual member of Congress may have with, an individual faculty member at a college or university may have with their program officer. So for example, at a college or university, a program officer at a federal agency is their link, it is their relationship to between the faculty member and the federal agency. And many of your faculty and staff have lost those contacts. That could be happening at the Department of Education. NIH, NASA, NOAA, and it's happening not only at the primary investigator level, but also for some of you, you've lost contacts that have previously helped you, say, with the drawdown process from the federal government. So at the grant and contract level, we have this upheaval related to grant terminations, the loss of jobs, and federal government agency efforts to alter significantly the indirect cost policy relationship between colleges and universities. And what has been happening is this started at the National Institutes of Health. The federal government issued a policy where they wanted to rescind the current negotiation and relationship that you have with the federal government. When it comes to that contracted and negotiated rate, and reduce and set a flat rate of 15%. This policy was issued at the National Institutes of Health, and we have subsequently seen this policy enacted at the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and now this week, the Department of Defense. And we believe that the federal government is going to continue this march toward a 15% indirect cost policy rate at other federal agencies as well. We also believe it may be possible that the federal government will try to simply enact a regulation limiting indirect costs to 15% across the board. We have not seen that across the board effort yet, but it is possible this administration will take a belt and suspenders approach and do exactly that. Now, why you are facing turmoil, tumultuous circumstances, or turbulence, whatever word you want to use, is because parties objecting to this limitation have taken the federal government to court. And we now have various lawsuits in various places with the federal government reflecting various agencies. So when it comes to the NIH, there was a temporary restraining order against the White House policy, and now there is a permanent injunction against that White House policy. But what that means is the federal government and the parties objecting, several associations here in Washington, will go to the U.S. Court of Appeals and before a judge to test whether the government has the ability to issue this policy. This creates a back and forth situation depending on how the judges rule. I believe the Trump administration will likely try to take this case all the way to the Supreme Court. We have a temporary injunction on some of the other agencies, and we are waiting for movement through the courts on Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, and Department of Defense at this time. So we've seen these announcements to limit that indirect cost policy. They are in various stages of legal action, and we're all just going to have to stay tuned as this plays out across the courts. We are also facing uncertainty when it comes to how the federal government is going to be funding federal agencies. So the first thing that I want to share with you here is that we do have a federal fiscal year budget in place that is in place until September 30th, 2025. Now, there are a lot of moving parts here. It's very confusing. I'm going to try my best to help you understand. With the federal fiscal year 2025 budget, the Trump administration should be spending what Congress has appropriated for federal fiscal year 2025. We are in a situation right now, however, where so many grants and contracts have been canceled, other new award programs have been delayed or canceled, and it is possible that the Trump administration will not get out the door what Congress has appropriated for federal fiscal year 2025. That potentially sets up a battle between Congress and the White House. The White House can be called out for something called impoundment. Impoundment means that the White House has not allowed the spending that Congress has mandated and that was enacted into law. However, it's very unclear whether Congress will actually take up that position. So far, House Republicans have been very supportive of President Trump and have been supportive of actions that the White House and the Office of Management and Budget have taken. And so, again, I just want to share that it is possible that there could be calls for accusing this White House of impoundment, but we don't necessarily have a Congress that is willing to take up that cause. So this is going to play out over the next several months. Layering over this, you may have heard that the White House put out a budget request. Now, that budget request is for fiscal year 2026. Fiscal year 2026 starts on October 1st. Right now, we're in federal FY25. Federal FY26 begins October 1st. Even in what we have seen from the White House, they issued a request on May 2nd. We have already seen that they significantly want to scale back the availability of funds from the federal government. So for those of you at research universities that may even have in your strategic plan a goal to increase research at your university, perhaps a goal to become an R2 or an R1 research university, you are going to be significantly challenged because it is largely the federal government that supports university-based research, and we have a White House who, for the next 4 years, I believe, is going to demonstrate a significant commitment to pulling back federal spending in the research space. So these battles are going to be playing out. It is unclear whether Congress will accept those cuts that were requested or proposed by the president. We don't know yet. We will not know until we get closer to that February 1st date. I do want to go back here and talk about the Department of Education, because here's where people get really worried, rightly so, about appropriations. So I mentioned that the federal government is currently funded through September of 2025. Now, this is federal fiscal year dollars. I want to clarify, though, that the federal government forward funds the Title IV aid programs. So for your academic year 25-26, for your academic year 25-26, you should be able to rely on what Congress has appropriated for Title IV aid. That spigot is not going to change on October 1st because of the way these Title IV programs are run. So for academic year 25-26, you can rely on that maximum Pell Grant award of $7,395. They have also level funded the work study program and SEOG. We can rely on these Title IV aid programs for academic year 25-26, because Congress and President Trump agreed to this as a part of FY25 spending. They are going to debate FY26, and I cannot make promises as to what your academic year 26-27 is going to look like. We could see significant changes. Already, this administration has called for pulling back on work study and SEOG. That could significantly alter the aid programs that are available. Again, you are okay for academic year 25-26, but things are entirely uncertain for academic years 26-27. All right, so we've talked a little bit about where appropriations stand. Let's talk a little bit about where things stand at the United States Department of Education. We have heard the call to close the Department of Education. First of all, the White House cannot unilaterally just eliminate the Department of Education. It does not work that way. It will take Congress if to agree to that act, should they agree to eliminate the Department of Education. And even the executive order that came out of the White House acknowledges that Congress has to change the law in order for there to be no Department of Education. However, at the same time, the President has charged Secretary McMahon with treating her role as Secretary of Education as the final mission of the Department of Education. So that is the overarching approach as to how we expect this Department of Education to be run, and that will likely create some challenges. At the same time, there are also directions to continue the federal aid programs, continue servicing the federal aid programs, and make sure that students and families do not experience disruptions. And we are seeing some evidence of that. We are seeing some evidence of that in that the department is actually trying to work on regulatory issues. They are trying to make sure the technology behind the FAFSA is continuing. And on top of that, there are executive orders in the education space, one calling for reforms to the accreditation process, another amplifying efforts to support historically Black colleges and universities, another calling for increased audit of foreign gift reporting by colleges and universities. And so we see this tug and pull behind what's perhaps tweeted or out there on or on X, on Truth Social, versus what is actually happening at the Department of Energy. So, or I'm sorry, at the Department of Education. One important note that I want to flag is that the Department of Education has called for colleges and universities to help in their communication related to defaulted loans. Some of you may know that in 2020, the federal government put a pause on collections related to federal student loans that are in default. They are planning to turn that process back on, and they have actually recently reached out to colleges and universities asking you to communicate to students who may have borrowed to attend your institutions, to communicate to them that they are on the hook once again for paying back those federal student loans. All right, now let's talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill. On Capitol Hill, there is a tax reform effort happening right now. We are in the thick of things in Washington. The House of Representatives and Speaker Johnson, our House Republicans are trying to move a tax package and more out of the House of Representatives, send it over to the Senate, with a goal of getting this done on the House side of Capitol Hill by Memorial Day, by Monday. Why is this so important? So, what is happening right now in Washington is that President Trump would like a tax bill passed. He's been calling it one big, beautiful bill. He would like this tax bill passed because the Trump tax cuts that were enacted in 2017, the tax cuts that were established as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, many, not all, but many of those tax cuts expire on December 31st of this year. So for example, the rate that you pay on your individual household return will expire and go up in 26 if Congress does nothing. If Congress does nothing, there are a lot of tax cuts that will expire, tax rates go up, and House Republicans and President Trump do not want this to happen. So House Republicans, however, have a very slim majority. They do not have a large majority, and they cannot afford to lose many votes in their effort to pass this tax bill. In the Senate, the Republican majority is even slimmer. There are only 51 Republican votes in the United States Senate. In order to move a tax package, in the Senate, they need to use a special process called reconciliation. So what is happening right now on Capitol Hill is lawmakers are working on a package called reconciliation that includes tax cuts as well as additional provisions so that they can pass it through the Senate and pass it through the House of Representatives and get this one big, beautiful bill to President Trump. Republicans have a goal of passing this bill in the House, as I said, by Monday, and ideally getting the legislation to President Trump by the 4th of July. They are sort of on track. They are sort of on track in that leadership has agreed to a bill in the House of Representatives, but they don't quite have enough votes to pass the bill this week just yet. There is a lot of arm twisting going on Capitol Hill. There are some fiscal conservatives who really object to the overall cost of this bill and the tax cuts that would be enacted as a part of it. There is a lot of negotiating going on. There is a lot of there are a lot of discussions, debates, deliberation, and it is yet to be seen whether or not the House will be able to get this bill passed this week. However, the devil is in the details, and there are a number of provisions that we at NACUBO are very concerned about. Here is your second code word. Let me just give you a minute here to get code word number 2, and we'll get into those individual provisions. All right. So, what are some of the provisions in the bill? There are a lot of changes to unrelated business income taxes. First of all, some of you may recall a very temporary tax that was enacted in 2017 but subsequently repealed related to the taxation of transportation benefits provided to employees at non-profit entities. That transportation benefit tax is back. This hits not just colleges and universities, but all nonprofit entities. At institutions where research is a major part of its mission, any research that is funded not from public sources, so from non-governmental sources, will also be taxed as well. So, for example, if you are at a research university and you receive support for research from a local private business, say, interested in Apple research, that revenue will become taxable revenue. Again, this is another issue that we're going to need to wait and see what the final bill looks like and final regulations look like, but these are new developments and new taxes. There was just last week, a provision that would have taxed name and logo licensing revenue. That provision has been removed. So those of you that had been concerned about the name, logo, sponsorship, licensing provision, that provision has been removed as of today. Anything is possible before a final bill is signed into law, but I did want to mention that that provision has been removed from the House bill. There is an executive compensation excise tax for any employees earning more than $1 million. This is not a new tax, but it currently only implicates up to 5 individuals. Now, this tax will apply to any individuals earning over $1 million. We largely see this potentially at institutions of higher education impacting perhaps employees at hospitals, doctors, and certain coaches in the athletic program. Again, this tax is also not just for colleges and universities, but any nonprofit entity. There is also a change in the endowment tax. There is an endowment tax that was enacted in 2017. It is a 1.4% tax that is applied on net investment income. That's NII there. It is applied to the net investment income of institutions with more than $500,000 in endowment per FTE. There is a new tiered rate that has been proposed in the House bill. So here's a little more information about the endowment tax here. It would be a graduated tax program impacting only private institutions, not public institutions, with, again, more than $500,000 per FTE. You can see this rate go from the current 1.4% to rates of 7%, 14%, and 21%. So at this time, this tax currently hits about 50 to 60 institutions. We expect this tax to hit a few more year after year gradually because of the way endowments work and the way investment returns work. We do over time see more and more institutions likely to be impacted by this tax. I do want to reiterate, this is just the House version. The Senate may not agree to this proposal, and we could see significant changes related to this endowment tax before the final bill is passed by Congress and enacted into law. I will go back here for a moment just to highlight that the House of Representatives is also calling for repeal of clean energy credits. I know many of your institutions actually have started claiming some of these energy credits based on projects on your campuses, whether you've purchased new electric vehicle fleets, put in new solar installations, or even I have heard of some institutions undertaking major geothermal efforts as a part of their heat plant. So many of your institutions had been starting to take advantage of these clean energy credits. I do not expect them to be retroactively repealed if at the end of the day they are repealed at all, but if these clean energy credits have been a part of your strategic planning process, I think you really need to make sure you understand the risk of these credits no longer being available. All right. There is some good news here. It's not all bad news here. There were a few things that actually help students, family, and institutions. So, first of all, colleges and universities as employers, you may be providing a benefit to your staff, your employees that provides them $5,250 toward the pursuit of higher education. That is made available through Section 127 of the Code. Congress continues this program, and they will be indexing this amount for inflation. It is the first time in 40 years that we will see that $5,250 number increase. Again, first time in 40 years. In addition, they will also be continuing and extending the possibility, the policy that allows employers to use Section 127 to pay a student loan, to pay an employee's student loan. So in addition to being able to provide them tuition assistance, you may also be able to provide them loan repayment assistance. There is actually a new and continuing charitable deduction for non-itemizers. The original 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act eliminated the ability of individual filers who don't itemize their taxes from taking a charitable deduction. This was a real blow to fundraisers of all types, whether they were fundraisers for colleges and universities or fundraisers for soup kitchens or zoos, museums, hospitals, because it is these small dollar donors that form a significant part of annual giving to institutions, but is also the introduction to a charitable relationship with institutions. And some of the small dollar donors eventually turn into large dollar donors for nonprofit organizations. So we're happy to see this charitable deduction for non-itemizers restored. Also, I think this audience will be happy about this. Your filing threshold for 1099s, if this House bill goes through, will go up to $2,000. I know we've already heard a number of tax directors be very happy about this, particularly those at large research universities where you may have a significant number of 1099s under that $2,000 threshold. And this should provide a significant amount of reporting relief for you, again, if this bill goes forward. We do not have a lot of detail on where the Senate plans to go. So once the House moves this bill over, it may wind up as the framework for the Senate. We also may see entirely new proposals from the Senate. So let me throw an example out there. Before we saw the draft legislation last week that the Ways and Means Committee eventually acted upon, we were very worried about college and university access to the tax-exempt bond market. Earlier in 2025, there was a threat that Congress might eliminate entirely access to municipal bonds as well as private activity bonds. We are thrilled that that proposal did not show up in this House bill. We are taking a sigh of relief, but we are not calling it quits when it comes to advocating for you and your access to these bond programs, because the Senate has not acted, because we don't know how they will position themselves on tax-exempt bonds and private activity bonds, and because there are so many hardliners opposing the expense of this tax bill. It is possible that Senate lawmakers may come in and say, look, in order to appease our fiscal conservatives, we're going to offset the price of this bill with changes to either the municipal bond market or the private activity bond market. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I am saying it's never over until it's over on Capitol Hill. That is one of the biggest issues that we at NACUBO continue to monitor on your behalf. This bill, however, does not end with tax issues. There are actually a number of other issues moving in tandem with all of those tax bills, several of them related to work coming out of the House of Representatives Education Committee. And they have attached education policy to this budget reconciliation bill, the same bill carrying all the tax issues that I just shared with you. So here are the proposals that we are concerned about. Number one is risk sharing. What does this mean? The risk sharing proposal in this bill effectively says, for students that are in default on their federal student loan, we are going to put colleges and universities for which they borrowed to attend on the hook for repayment of those student loans. So if you have individuals who attended your institution, borrowed to attend your institution, and then go into default, the federal government is saying, oh, your institution failed because this student is in default, and now your institution needs to be on the hook for their federal student loan. This is risk sharing, and this is currently moving in the House bill. There's the elimination of subsidized loans altogether. This significantly alters access to federal borrowing for students. There's the elimination of the Graduate Plus loan program and new restrictions on the Parent Plus program. There are caps on aggregate loan borrowing. In effect, this changes how much individuals may borrow to attend your institution. There are also some changes to Pell Grant eligibility. Students will be required to carry a new limit or a new threshold of credits in order to access their Pell Grant. We are particularly worried about how some of these changes will impact part-time and community college students. The Education Committee reconciliation provisions also include new efforts to consolidate repayment plans. If you are currently in repayment on a federal education loan, there's a menu of options as to how you may repay your federal loan, and this bill would change that menu of options altogether. So again, a large number of changes moving in tandem with all of the other tax issues that I shared with you here today. Also adding to the tumultuous situation are policies regarding international students. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about those here, but let's take a minute here to make sure you can catch the code word.
Liz, in the meantime, can you provide more perspective on the median cost of attendance and how this can be calculated by program?
Cost of attendance, I'm going to have to follow up on that question. That is actually a highly regulated calculation. That is something I'd probably need to follow up with individually on.
I've got their name. Thanks, Liz.
Yep. Alrighty. When it comes to international students, this too is creating or adding to the tumultuous circumstances on your college and university campuses. There's a high level of anxiety in those offices that serve international students and scholars. There's been concerns about ICE raids on campus, and there was the experience of just a few weeks ago where your institutions using the Student Exchange and Visitor Information System, this is the software that connects your institution to the federal government. That software system was suddenly eliminating individual student data. Colleges and universities were realizing on daily audits that the SEVIS record for individual students enrolled at those institutions was just gone. No notice to the student, no notice to the institution. That put individual students in the circumstance of wondering whether they needed to leave the country or whether they needed to hire a lawyer. Frankly, dozens of students, if not hundreds of students, did hire lawyers. These cases immediately went to the courts, and the Department of Homeland Security paused what was happening. And what was happening was essentially if there was any record at all of a foreign student with some kind of interaction with government or police, those records were being pulled. So in some cases, the example was a foreign student had a speeding ticket. That student was flagged, removed from the system. And the Department of Homeland Security was hoping to use that as a way to force foreign students to leave the country. What happened is essentially, as these cases went to court, this is my interpretation of what happened. I think the Department of Homeland Security realized that this was not a legally sound way of pursuing their goals, that they could not just make a student's visa status simply disappear. The SEVIS system has been restored. However, I think we have an indication of where Homeland Security is going to go with their new policies related to foreign students on your campuses. So if you have not done this already at your institutions, leaders, administrators should be reviewing what your policies are on campus in terms of how to handle a subpoena from ICE or a warrant from ICE, and understand the difference between certain types of subpoenas and warrants, and also understand the requirements of FERPA, what cannot be disclosed and what may be disclosed. I know it's very easy for institutions to say, I can't disclose that, it's FERPA. But my experience has also been that there is over-reliance on the notion of FERPA. And in fact, individuals should be aware that most directory information can be disclosed. It is not FERPA protected. So it's a great time as we enter the end of the semester, as we prepare for what may be going forward related to international students, to review who is responsible for interacting with ICE, who is responsible for understanding FERPA, and what information may or may not be shared generally. With all of this going on in Washington, I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have available. NACUBO earlier this year released what we call our More is Possible project. And we've released this because, in a sense, all of the issues that I've shared with you, all of them relate to increasing questions about the value of higher education and what the value of a college degree may be. And we put this project together as a way to help you talk about the value of higher education, whether it's at your own dinner table or whether it is as a part of your efforts to talk to your own students, faculty, and community stakeholders. So we'll take a look at some of those slides here in a moment, but let's take another minute here to take care of code word number 4. All right, so here's one example of some of the infographics that we have available in that resource, and that's available at nacubo.org/more is possible. This is one of my favorites in the deck. I firmly believe that when an individual leaves college, they leave college with the ability to write well, communicate persuasively, work with other people in small groups, and solve complex problems. And they are able to do so at a higher level than an individual with a high school diploma, and that some college makes a significant difference toward those goals as well as toward other skills or qualifications they have made in their higher education journey. And I like this chart because we see exactly that. We see that employers are seeking individuals with a certain level of education, and they are increasingly seeking individuals with certain types of degrees, and certainly more than a high school diploma. So here we, again, just have evidence that employers are indeed relying on a college-educated workforce. Here we have a slide that includes some infographics about lifetime earnings by educational attainment. Give me a minute to look at this one. And then here we have a slide that looks at endowments. One of my experiences here at NACUBO is that folks from colleges or universities are so reluctant to talk about endowments, and I've never understood why, because the endowment exists to support the mission of your institution. No money, no mission. If you don't have resources to provide a quality education, or to deliver on the research mission of your institution, or to deliver on the public service mission of your institution, you're not going to be able to meet your mission. And endowments are a part of that revenue picture. And from our own NACUBO Common Fund study of endowments, we know that nearly half, 48%, of spending goes to support students and to student financial aid. Other endowment spending goes to support academic programs. It goes to support the operation and maintenance of facilities, endowed faculty positions. Your endowment spending tells the story of your institution's mission. And so while this chart is portraying information at the national level, I think this is something that you could each do individually for your institutions, and frankly, with even more detail. With student financial aid, you could talk about the numbers of students. You could talk about which schools or programs they're in. You could talk about which faculty positions, which dean or director or program head is supported with an endowed faculty position, which academic programs, and instead of talking about the return earned on your endowment each year, talk about the number of dollars spent by the endowment each year. Something else we also know about the endowments at your colleges and universities is that they the spending from them increases year after year, and that spending increases year after year because of the way you are managing your endowments. So endowments are a key and critical part of how you are helping your institution meet its mission. Another thing we know about endowments is that they're helping you with scholarships, and scholarships are grant aid. They are not loans. And in fact, when we look at the national picture, the College Board has research that now shows that colleges and universities are providing more student financial grant aid than the federal government. If you add up how much U.S. colleges and universities spend on student financial aid and compare it to how much is spent by the federal government on Pell Grants and the post 9/11 GI Bill program, college and university spending on that grant aid outstrips the federal investment. Colleges and universities are doing more to support students with grant aid than the federal government. And yet, here we are being criticized by the federal government about the lack of value that we're offering. So we have stories to tell, and this More is Possible deck is really meant to help you get out there and help you tell the story. We have a good story to tell. We'll pause for another code word. All right. I will share as we kind of close up here, but we have time. We have plenty of time for questions and answers. Please do stay informed, but also keep us informed at NACUBO. We do not have faculty. We do not have staff. We do not draw down from the federal government. So we need you in partnership with us to tell us what you're experiencing on campus. If you are having problems with drawdowns, we'd really like to know. If something has changed related to an education department policy, we'd really like to know. We have advisory councils that help keep us up to speed on what's happening or not happening from Washington. But the more we have eyes and ears out there with our members, the better we can be to keep you informed and to work as your advocates back here in Washington. We do hope you are considering the risks and opportunities. I have spoken to many business officers who have for months now been developing risk scenarios for their boards and their presidents. What will it look like if, for example, the indirect cost rate is limited to 15% across the board from all federal grants and agencies? I have heard from business officers that they're essentially putting together scenarios: red light, what programs will need to end; orange light, what programs would we like to keep but maybe can't afford to; and green light, what will we find other alternatives to help support. We also really want you to be our partners in talking to your lawmakers about what's happening in Washington. NACUBO's board was on Capitol Hill about a month or so ago, talking to offices on both sides of the aisle. And on Capitol Hill, one of the experiences we had, we were a little concerned going up there talking to them about this tumultuous situation. But even House and Senate Republicans asked us to continue the conversation. They were telling us they were often hearing about new policies in the news just like we were. They were not getting inside information or advance notice about new policies of the White House. They also very much want to know how their constituents are impacted. If you are a college or university, you should be talking to your 2 U.S. senators and your local congressperson about what's happening and how your campus is impacted. Now, I encourage you to do that with your president or your individual who may be assigned to government relations on your campus, but it's really important that they understand how what's happening from Washington is impacting your campus, or how what's on the table, as I described with these tax policies, are impacting your campus. So please continue to stay informed. Please continue to communicate with us. And please, I am asking you to amplify your communications with your local lawmakers. So, Megan, I can tell the chat was busy while I was talking, but I wasn't able to watch it and talk at the same time. So I am happy to answer questions you or others may have here.
Liz, I'll jump in real fast. We did get a question. If reconciliation fails, what would you expect to be addressed in separate regular legislation?
Yeah, so I will share that I don't expect reconciliation to fail completely. My bet all along is that this process was probably going to take us up to Thanksgiving or maybe into December. Now, I could be wrong, but let me give you my readout of the situation. I thought it would be a long, difficult process, that we wouldn't be that we would get a tax bill, because I think even if Kamala Harris were in the White House, we'd be working on a tax bill. I just think that even Democrats don't want to see the rollback of the 2017 tax rates. But what has surprised me so far on Capitol Hill this year is that House Republicans have generally been working together very well. Speaker Johnson was confirmed in just one vote. A House budget resolution was effectively passed in just one night. I never would have expected that based on how close the margin is in the House. On the Senate side, I have frankly been a little surprised at how quickly President Trump's cabinet nominations have moved through the Senate. I thought for sure we would see some additional trouble for the president, but by and large, I think all but 2 of his original announced cabinet nominations have moved through without a problem, or without the withdrawal of the nominee. So this Congress has been working very hard to support the goals of this White House. So that being said, I do not expect reconciliation to fail, but I believe it could be slow. I also believe that, as I said before, Democrats and Republicans want to keep these tax rates, and we need to have a tax bill, in my opinion. There are people who disagree with me, so don't take my word for it, but I think we need to have a tax bill in place by December 1st so that ADP, Paychex.com, all of your payroll providers don't have to be scrambling on Christmas Day to get new software code in place for January 1 when you run your first payroll after January 1. They want to have at least a month to be able to have your payroll processing where it needs to be in order for you to run payroll and withhold the correct amounts for your first payroll of 2026. So I believe we're going to get there. I don't know that we're going to get there before July 4th. My money has always been on Thanksgiving. Now, if reconciliation fails, if they can't get this process through, here's what I expect to happen. They will pass some kind of temporary extension of current law with no new law, some type of temporary extension of current law, and they will come back to reconciliation next year. Remember, every Congress is a 2-year Congress, so we will have a Republican majority in the House this year and next year. We do not have another congressional election cycle until November of 2026, and I would say there is a possibility that the following Congress on Capitol Hill may have a Democratic majority in the House and or Senate. So if reconciliation fails this year, they're going to work hard to make sure they get it done next year while they have a Republican majority in the House and Senate and President Trump in the White House. Separate regular legislation. Let me get to that part of the question. I don't believe this Congress can pass much when it comes to separate regular legislation, and that is because of the filibuster in the Senate. If we need to move regular legislation, the United States Senate needs 60 votes. That means the 51 Republican senators need to find 9 Democratic senators to go along with them. I don't think President Trump is in any mood for bipartisan compromise, and I don't think there's much regular legislation that will move forward. Very few pieces of legislation.
Liz, if someone was looking to help talk, conversation points with their senators and Congress people, what does NACUBO have to help with that? Kind of make it the most efficient process while not needing to read all the background and articles. Could you enlighten us on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so I would say if you need help with those basics, feel free to reach out to me directly at lclark@nacubo.com or .org, sorry, or the team at the email address that you see on the slide. We can help you with that. Here are a few things to think about. Congressional offices rely on young professionals to run. And therefore, when you contact a congressional office, you may or may not have the opportunity to speak with the actual member of Congress. You will be speaking with someone who could be 25 years old and a recent graduate of your institution. But don't let that lead you to think they are not influential. Our nation is run by these 25-year-olds running congressional offices. So what you need to think about is a very short elevator pitch type story that will resonate with someone that perhaps doesn't have a long life experience. So when we think about endowments, I have had to pivot my thinking to try to explain endowments, which rest on the power of time and interest and compounding value with individuals who may have never borrowed for a car, may not have a mortgage, could be renters and walk to work on Capitol Hill. And so we really have to think about how to simplify our stories and how to help stories resonate with an audience that is limited on time and frankly maybe limited on experience as well, but may also come to the conversation believing they know everything there is to know about higher education because they went to college. So that is just a top line. I will say we rest on one-pagers, and I literally mean one page, not 2 pages, not the front and back, just the front page of a document that can very simply tell your story. I will also throw out there, don't be afraid of AI. You may want to say, for example, use ChatGPT or another AI source and say, I'd like to express this position in 1 page or less. Can you help me do it? I am not ashamed of saying that I have used AI to help me frame some of my communications to simplify things that are very complex. So just a few thoughts there on that question.
I apologize if this has already been answered, but someone asked if there were 5 codes for this session. Oh wait, sorry, that's about code words, not about. Yes, there were only 5 code words.
Maybe go to Julia. I don't know if the slide needs to be advanced or not from here, but otherwise I'm going to assume that we showed all the codes that people needed.
Yes, all code words have been done, but we still have quite a few minutes if we'd like to ask any questions. We've got a great expert here, and we'd love to use the time while we have her.
Liz, do you expect any walkbacks on the DEI?
This is a great question.
Things going out.
So with diversity, equity, and inclusion, here's where we are. There were executive orders on January 20th related to diversity, equity, inclusion. One of the executive orders said, quote unquote, illegal DEI. But the fact of the matter is diversity, equity, and inclusion is not illegal at the federal level. Now, some of your states may have rules and enacted state laws related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I cannot speak to what your state laws are. So if you have laws related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in your state, you must comply with those laws. And it is your local and state politics that will determine any rollbacks at that level. On the federal level, there are laws related to the handling of race in admissions and the handling of discrimination, particularly in a code called Title VI. There are federal rules and federal laws that define how you must treat race in admissions and how you handle discrimination on your campus. These laws should have been looked at particularly closely after the Students for Fair Admissions case was decided by the Supreme Court about 2 years ago now. Your institutions and your council should know exactly what your compliance looks like related to Title VI, SFFA, and other laws related to discrimination on your campus. But the notion of diversity, the notion of equity, and the notion of inclusion are not illegal, and how your institution decides to comply with the goals of the executive orders is dependent on your state law and your institution's tolerance for risk. And whether, and I guess the question was whether or not they would be rolled back. I do not see this administration taking any steps to roll back the executive orders related to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Liz, we got another question. What do you expect the Senate to do with the education side in the reconciliation bill? We're hearing that the Senate may not be supportive of the at-risk and perhaps the median cost of attendance.
Yeah, I do believe that the Senate will soften the blow of many of the policies, both the education elements of the reconciliation bill as well as the tax elements of the bill. That being said, they also have to play politics and make sure that they have members who feel like they are having their priorities seen and enacted in this bill. The Senate has held their thinking very close to the vest. Now, what happened on the Senate side was there was a leaked memo much earlier this year that gave us some indication of how extreme the House bill might be. The Senate has been much more careful, has not shared many details, and again has just kept they have kept their positions close. So I wish I could say I knew where they were going, but they just they have, I would say, in conversations with our team and with other colleagues, it seems they are sympathetic, but there's very little detail being shared, and I can't answer that question with any specificity. And then in terms of timing, the stated timing is that President Trump would like a bill before July 4th. I still expect this bill to slip farther into the fall. I just have a hard time seeing this go over to the Senate and being quickly passed. But as I admitted earlier, this Congress, both the House and Senate, have been moving much more quickly on President Trump's priorities than I expected this year.
Liz, if you got to be all powerful, mighty Liz for the day, what's one policy that you would want to see changed, or one item that you feel like should become the next hot topic or improvement in the industry?
So on the tax side, I'd get rid of the endowment tax. I know that there's a lot of sour grapes out there. I also know that there's a lot of individuals who do not think big is good. But at the end of the day, the institutions with large endowments are using them to support students, to support research, and those endeavors should not be diminished. They are supporting medical research, defense research, and public policy goals in support of education, students, and our nation. And I do not believe that endowment tax does anything besides confiscate dollars that would otherwise be used for good. So that is my top line reaction. My other general reaction is that I think many, if not most, of the education policies need to be softened, but I will put out there, I hope they do force some serious thinking at colleges and universities. It goes to the notion of never let a good crisis go to waste. I think that the nation did not like President Biden's decision to forgive student loans. And a lot of what we're seeing with these policies, frankly, is backlash to President Biden's student loan forgiveness policies. And the nation came to that conversation in a very binary way. They either loved it or they hated it. And I think there needs to be a conversation about how students and families pay for college. So let me throw out there this. In some of my talks, I talk about how the biggest myth that Americans continue to believe is that K-12 education is free. K-12 education is not free. K-12 education costs taxpayers somewhere between $13,000 and $22,000 per student per year, depending on what state you're in. And that happens because your state lawmakers made a commitment to support public K-12 education. But K-12 education is not free for anyone. So we shouldn't be surprised that tuition is what it is when educating a 7-year-old with one teacher in one building can cost as much as $22,000 a year. And so if I could wave a magic wand, it would be helping people understand that education and delivering high quality education costs money. The other anecdote that I would relate to that is I live in the state of Maryland. In the state of Maryland, putting an infant in child-based daycare for a year is more expensive than in-state tuition at the University of Maryland at College Park. Providing infant daycare is more expensive than in-state tuition at the University of Maryland at College Park. That's another story that I don't think politicians, lawmakers, the public, the media talk about enough because it reflects the expense of what it takes to take care of a human being. And when we talk about education and the cost of public college tuition going up, the public should say, you know, in a knee-jerk reaction, oh yeah, colleges and universities need to buy eggs and steel too. We understand that they're concerned about inflation and the costs of running a dining hall or the cost of building a new dormitory. And we understand why it costs so much to educate a student. So it's not so much that I have one policy here, it's that I would change the way that Americans think about how to fund education, how it is funded. And I would flip the conversation around. I think people blame colleges and universities for how much college costs, but I'm going to flip that around and blame politicians. College costs what it costs because the government hasn't defined how it's going to invest in higher education, whether it's public or private in our nation. So that might get people a little agitated and excited, but I think the questions coming to colleges and universities have been positioned wrongly. I think that our government hasn't decided how it's wanted to fund higher education, and it gets away with letting people believe that K-12 is free.
Well, thank you, Liz. I think that should be a headline, honestly. As someone who has kids in daycare, I agree. That's great. No, we really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us. I don't know if you want to give a quick plug for NACUBO's Washington updates or anything else quickly.
Yeah, I will just close by saying thank you for being NACUBO members. We couldn't follow these issues or have a team that communicates with you and lawmakers without your membership. You make it possible. And don't be afraid to give us a ring. Let us know what's happening on your campus. We try our best to answer your questions. And Dean Dorton, thank you for having me here today.
Great. Thanks again, Liz. Very quickly, we did put all the attendees' name in our, and we've drawn Jason Henderson as the winner of the cooler at the 2:30-ish break. So Jason, you'll be hearing from Julia to get your cooler sent to you. So that's exciting. And then again, thank you, Liz. And we're actually going to adjust the agenda just a little bit, and we'll come back at 2:30. So I'm sure if everybody was off mute, Liz, you'd be getting a thunderous round of applause. Thank you again, and we'll see everybody back here at 2:30. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Guy Cozy. I am the cybersecurity practice lead with Dean Dorton. And on the call with me, I've got Kevin Cornwell, the IT Audit Associate Director. So thanks again for having us today. We are going to tackle a topic that is vital to your institution's future: cybersecurity and compliance in higher education. And as you navigate an increasingly digital landscape, you're facing risks that demand immediate attention and strategic action. So our goal with Kevin is going to guide you through the evolving cybersecurity landscape, showing why your institution might be a prime target, identifying the latest threats, and addressing the compliance challenges that you face. But most importantly, we'll do our best to equip you with practical strategies, and we'll introduce you to Dean Dorton's cybersecurity risk and compliance services that we believe can help you protect your institution. Let's see if I got control of the presentation here. Oh, there it is. Yeah. All right, so now we all should see the agenda slide here. So we'll start by exploring why cybersecurity is a strategic priority for your institution in today's world. Next, we'll explain why higher education is such an attractive target for cyber criminals and what makes your environment uniquely vulnerable. We'll unpack the real cost of cyber incidents, should that be financial, reputational, and operational, using real-world examples that unfortunately may hit close to home. Then we'll dive into threats like ransomware, data breaches, phishing, IoT, or Internet of Things, and we'll talk about AI, the bright side and the dark side of AI. Then Kevin will take it from there, and compliance will take the center stage. He'll help you navigate regulations such as FERPA, GDPR, and HIPAA, and he'll talk to you about the consequences of falling short. Finally, we'll share proven strategies to safeguard your institution and show how our services can partner with you and your team to achieve your security and compliance goals. So something I'd like to say is this isn't just about technology. It's about protecting your students, faculty, research, and legacy. So let's dive in and build a secure future for your institution. So we believe that higher education institutions are at a pivotal moment. The technologies powering your online courses, research, administration are also exposing you to significant risks. Cybersecurity is no longer optional. It's essential to ensuring your mission strives. We know that cyber attacks on the education sector are surging, and it's a direct challenge to your operations. Good trouble advancing the slide here. Oh, thank you. Somebody did that for me. The growing importance of cybersecurity. Most institutions have embraced digital tools, learning platforms like Canvas and Blackboard. They move to the cloud from on-prem data centers. They're using mobile applications for student services. So these technologies are great for education, but they have also widened your attack surface, making cybersecurity a top priority. Since the pandemic, most, if not all, higher education institutions expanded online offerings. We believe that this really rapid shift has outpaced security measures, leaving gaps that cyber criminals are eager to exploit. So cybersecurity isn't just an IT task, it's a strategic necessity. A single breach can halt your classes, compromise your research, and undermine your mission, affecting everything from enrollment to funding. Your students expect their data to be secure. Your faculty need safe research environments. Your donors want assurance their contributions are protected. A robust cybersecurity and compliance program builds trust around the community. Oops. One too quickly here. Right. So why higher education is a target? Institutions like yours hold just a wealth of sensitive data, from student PII, or personally identifiable information, research information, financial records. Cyber criminals see you as a high-value target with significant reward. There's also a very open environment, an open culture in higher education. There's open networks, shared resources, academic freedom. All of these can be strengths, but they can also some vulnerabilities. They create multiple entry points for attackers to exploit. Bring your own device challenges as well. Each student's faculty staff can use personal devices to access the systems or to do classwork. It's impossible to secure all of these devices. One unsecure laptop or phone can compromise an entire network. And Kevin and I worked with many organizations, and we know that most often there are small IT teams and tight budgets. So keeping up with some of these new threats, like the AI-driven attacks, can be overwhelming. So the cost of cyber incidents, a cyber incident carries a hefty price tag, not just about the recovery cost, system restoration, legal fees, potential ransom payments. All of these costs can reach millions of dollars. Based on the sources of the statistics, it's between $1 and $2 million per incident. But most importantly, it's not just about the direct cost, but thinking about reputation. A breach can scare off prospective students, alienate donors, and generate negative headlines. It takes time to recover from a cyber incident and it takes time to rebuild trust. We believe that investing in cybersecurity now is a fraction of this cost. It's not just about avoiding disasters. It's about ensuring your institution's stability, growth, and ability to serve your community. So now let's dive a little bit in some of these threats. And I am sure you'll be familiar with most of them. And most of you know about ransomware, which is a malicious software that encrypts systems, data, locking you out until you pay a ransom. Many higher education institutions have had to deal with ransomware. Attackers often infiltrate through phishing emails, encrypting everything from gradebooks, financial systems. If your backups are not secure, they can be targeted too, leaving you with no recovery option. So ransomware often leads to data breaches. We'll talk a little bit about data breaches in the second slide, but I want to talk a little bit about the extortion scheme. So not having access to the system in the data is often the first step in a ransomware incident. The second step is that the threat actors are going to extract the information and ask you to pay a ransom. If not, they're going to threat to publish that data on the dark web. We don't see that third threat yet, but we do in higher ed, but we do see that in the healthcare institutions, for instance. So the third extortion is that the cyber criminals in healthcare, for instance, are going straight to the patient with their medical records and ask for a ransom. Again, we've not seen that in higher education yet, but it would not be a stretch to imagine that cyber criminals, if they can get hold of sensitive student information, may not go directly to the student or the family and get some payment. So business continuity and incident response plans are critical. And we'll touch on that in the second part of the presentation. So second threat, data breaches. So they can occur when attackers gain unauthorized access to your sensitive information. And again, we're talking about student records, research, or financial data. And most of the time, organizations don't even notice until they receive a note saying that the data has been extracted. In 2023, I've got the statistics here. 104 education breaches exposed 2.2 million records, leading to identity theft, legal liabilities, and reputational harm. So results are lawsuits, regulatory fines, and a PR crisis that can take months to recover, impacting enrollment and trust. Some of the common causes for data breaches are weak passwords, unpatched software, or insider errors, such as, could be losing a laptop or sending an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of sensitive information. What's challenging is that every vulnerability in your systems is an opportunity for attackers to exploit. So make sure you encrypt your data at rest and in transit to make it as useless as possible to cyber criminals. Enforce role-based access controls to limit who can see information and audit your system regularly to catch weak spots. Security isn't just about technology, it's about people. Educating everyone from students to deans reduces accidental leaks and make your security posture a lot stronger. Again, a breach doesn't just cost money. It risks pretty much the future of organization. And we'll talk about a case study later where an institution had to close after being the victim of a cyber incident. We got code word number 6 here. Make sure I leave enough time for people to enter that in the app. Could be 911, but it's 901. So, all right, next threat, phishing attacks. Phishing has evolved into a high-tech threat. Cyber criminals are using AI to generate emails that can mimic your registrar, your IT team, or even your president, and tricking users into sharing credentials or clicking malicious links. No one is immune from that scheme. In fact, 90+% of breaches start with a phishing attack. So what we recommend is deploy advanced email filters with AI-based detection to catch these threats. And we'll talk a little bit more about AI. You know, I'm still on the phishing thing, you know. Let me go back. Okay, there you go. We'll talk about AI versus AI. The bad guys are using AI. We believe that you need to use AI also embedded in some of the security tools to be able to fight back. So it's going to be a common theme during the presentation. But in addition, make sure that you're using phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Training, MFA, and advanced phishing tools can drastically reduce the threat of phishing attacks. And then IoT stands for Internet of Things vulnerabilities. And we believe that we've seen that pretty much everywhere. Campuses are filled with IoT devices. It could be a smart board, a security camera, thermostat, something used in labs, etc., etc. Most of the time, these devices have a lot of security weaknesses, and they make it easy backdoors for attackers. A typical university might have thousands of IoT devices. If just one is compromised, it can provide access to your network, exposing student data, research, financial systems. Thinking about the impact, you know, imagine a hacked security camera on a campus. Not only this could be an entry point for cyber criminals to access critical systems, but there's also a privacy concern there with direct access to CCTV system and cameras. Make sure that these devices are secure. The first step is to have an inventory, making sure what they are, where they are, how can we patch them, how can we segment them, so we want to isolate them from other parts of the network and do an ongoing security assessment to make sure that these devices are kept secure. AI-powered attacks. So now cyber criminals are leveraging AI to launch rapid, scalable attacks. Think automated phishing campaigns, for instance, adaptive malware, and deepfakes that can impersonate your leadership. So what's an adaptive malware? It's a piece of malicious code that can morph itself so rapidly that it can evade most of the antivirus software. And that's why, again, it's a case of AI versus AI. The bad guys are using AI to quickly adapt their malicious code to evade technology, you need the technology that has AI capabilities to be able to detect some of these things. Deepfake is also a concern. I've done a demonstration in another talk where I can go online, sample a few seconds of somebody's voice on a YouTube video or Facebook video, for instance, and I can make that person pretty much say whatever I want. That technology is extremely cheap today, and it's real time. For instance, if you're using Microsoft Teams and you've got the right license, Microsoft can do the translation for you in real time in different languages. That same technology is being used by the bad guys to change their voice and impersonate people. I believe that in just a few months, the same technology will be available for videos, for deepfake videos. Now, it still takes a little bit of time to build a deepfake videos, but with the advancement of AI and technology, it's going to be real time, very affordable, very, very quickly. So the good news is there's also a bright side of AI, and Kevin is going to talk to you about that.
Thank you, Guy. Yes, we thought it would be helpful to provide a balanced approach to AI because without a doubt, it is inserting a new set of risks to our security program. Let's see if I've got control here. Not quite yet. So I'll just keep talking. So we'll get control, and I'll then start moving things along. So with AI risks also comes a lot of opportunity. And what we're actually seeing this being deployed in higher ed to a great deal of success. So one of the big areas that we're seeing AI benefiting is with student retention. So there have been some universities across the country that have put in basically AI chat bots to help answer questions that enrolled students or students that have indicated interest in enrolling can go to and ask questions. And these chatbots field a lot of questions that are probably beyond the ability to staff and answer these questions. So anyway, answers are being provided whereas before a large number of them would have gone unanswered. And we're seeing universities that do this cut retention, loss retention rates by as much as 20%. So, that alone could pay for an AI solution and then some. But we're also seeing AI chatbots improving student life. So again, it tends to be along the lines of answering student questions, but let's say a student might be a new student to the area, first year freshman, and they've got a question. There's a group, we've got 4 or 5 of us. We want to find a really good pizza restaurant that's got nice draft beer and some IPAs. That question can be thrown at the chat AI, and it'll pop up with, here's a list that meets those criteria. Here are the closest ones, and even give some pricing information with that for those on a small budget. So anyway, AI can be used for reducing or improving retention rates and improving student life on campus. Let's see if I've got. Oh, I do have control. So, all right, great. So here's a list of some other things. In addition to, I'll say, answering questions, AI is being used to help with administrative functions and decision making, improving the learning process, being able to identify maybe some some problem areas in a student's learning process and providing options early in the process to help correct those, and providing information to professors and teachers. So anyway, the moral of this story is I would highly encourage looking at opportunities to introduce AI into your institutions to improve all kinds of areas, not just student areas, but even helping with back office functions to alleviate maybe some of the workload. So anyway, it's a good thing to consider. AI is not something we want to be all just afraid of and uncertain of. It's got some real opportunities. Now, and that leads into compliance. So like any technology that has introduced itself to our world over the decades, it increases new risks or adds new risks to our risk registers. And what we're seeing is now a lot of these compliance areas haven't quite adapted to AI, but the reality is AI is a technology solution. So yes, it's a bit more complex than pulling an off-the-shelf product in and installing it on a computer. But nonetheless, it's a new technology, and a lot of the existing controls and security defenses we have in place apply to AI, just like any other technological solution. So what we discuss here in compliance is going to apply to it and the rest of our security program. But I think, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on each one of these, but I wanted to put them together on a single slide as a visual to kind of drive home that colleges and universities are a highly regulated industry. And I could probably safely say a very highly regulated industry. I think we would probably all agree that we consider healthcare to be highly regulated. But if you look at this list, the graphic that's on this list, healthcare applies to the second half of the list. Maybe GDPR, maybe sometimes, but higher ed, all six. Healthcare, half the list. So you are more regulated than healthcare, and that increases the challenge of trying to stay on top of this and not only be compliant, but understand what compliance means. And all of these, except one, I'll hit that on the slide, and even that's not even true for that one. All of these are changing on an almost annual basis. And so again, keeping up with them is a challenge. So let's start looking at these one by one. And so FERPA is the one that I almost would say hasn't changed. It certainly hasn't changed as much as the others. So when FERPA first came out, electronic data was not quite a thought during the process when these regulations were being developed. It's almost pre-information technology. And so if you actually read the FERPA guidelines, there's not a whole lot in there that relates to IT security and electronic data. Now, you can translate some things that say, okay, if this applies to hard copy, here's how it applies to electronic data, and that's the right way to do it. Now, fortunately, and I think it's been within the last 5 years, FERPA released what they called cybersecurity guidelines, and it's what FERPA needed to catch up to the information technology age on protecting student data. Now, they're guidelines. They are technically not on the same level as federal regulatory law. However, when we help institutions navigate the risks that FERPA compliance brings to the table, and how to improve the security program related to FERPA, we rely pretty heavily on those cybersecurity guidelines. I mean, basically, it's what FERPA believes are appropriate security controls to be in place to be compliant with FERPA. So, so anyway, at least they've done that. And what we're seeing, and I'll kind of hit on this on each of them. There's different penalties and fines or negative consequences for non-compliance with these regulatory authoritative bodies. And I'll be the first to admit that when you're trying to allocate resources, you try to plug the biggest holes first. So the ones that will hurt the most, the ones with the largest fines or the largest negative consequences, let's make sure we're good there first. And so with FERPA, yes, there's loss of federal funding. There's the risk of lawsuits. It's been around for a while. It's well understood. It's expected. So, this is one that can't really get away with not treating seriously. Now, again, the penalties may not be as severe as some of the other compliance requirements, but nobody wants to see their name in the headline with a FERPA non-compliance finding, because a lot of people know what that means. So FERPA is kind of foundational. Now, the next one's GLBA, and this one's been around for, quite a while, decade or I think the first notice came out about a decade ago, and it really didn't gain traction until a few years after that. But GLBA compliance is for any institution that handles student financial aid. So the way the law interprets an organization that provides loans of any type, that means you're a lender, and GLBA requirements therefore apply. And the GLBA compliance requirements, I'll say there's the full list that's in the federal code, and then there's a shorter list that the single audit OMB compliance circular says we're going to audit you on these. So the answer, and this is what I'll say if anyone ever asks every time, is we've got to be compliant with the full list. Now, again, going with the theory of let's make sure we plug the holes that are going to cause the most pain. The ones on the audit list would be the ones I would address first. And again, at this point, GLBA compliance has been around long enough. We are not seeing anybody with any compliance issues. Everybody's doing the full list, and doing well in the single audits. And I hope that's across the board. But again, it's mature enough and been around enough. I think most people understand it. But it is maturing and evolving. I think it was a couple years ago, the FTC released the safeguards rule, and it built on the GLBA requirements and got them here. There has to be a qualified individual before it could kind of be a committee. And we even offered that as one way to tackle that, but now it's got to be a single individual. It does not have to be somebody internal. It can actually be an external outsourced role. And then they significantly, I'll say, increased the requirements around what a risk assessment looks like. And I'm going to talk more about risk assessments later, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but what constitutes an adequate, sufficient risk assessment was kind of beefed up in the FTC safeguards rule. Included, they also added the need to do penetration testing, the importance of policies and procedures, governance and oversight, and then having an instant response plan. So again, these are all fairly foundational to a good cybersecurity program. But now whether you're doing it or not, it's actually being audited. And the penalty here for GLBA compliance actually could be fairly significant. And that's the loss of Title IV funding, the inability to provide student financial aid. I am not aware of any occurrences of that to date, but that would be a pretty huge, life-changing, game-changer event for any college or university. So this one's got some bite to it. Now we've got GDPR compliance, and I've got a little bit more to say about this later. But I would tell you, I've been communicating to colleges and universities that of all the compliance requirements that you face today, GDPR's got one of the smallest pain points to it. And that's because, this is originating from a country across the waters. And if they want to come and get us, they're going to have to cross those waters to do so. And besides, the amount of international student data, a lot of us retain is minimal. It's a small percentage of the overall data population. And again, and we don't have, and especially if we don't have a campus presence over in the EU, again, what are they going to do? They may have there may be a few things they can do, but at the end of the day, it's not as painful as some of the other compliance requirements we're facing. Now, that does not mean the right answer is to ignore it. It just might be lower on, I've been suggesting just putting it lower on the priority list and getting to it after some of these others have been addressed sufficiently. So it's real, it's required, and so just ignoring it forever is not the right answer. But again, in the whole scheme of things, it's probably one I'd get to later rather than sooner. And I'm not even sure at this point, because I've not seen any examples of it in higher ed, what they would do if they decided to pursue those efforts. All right, HIPAA compliance. So big reason this comes into play, one could be is you have some kind of healthcare education program, nurses, doctors, dentistry, that certainly could come into play. If you don't have those, it could still be a factor if you have any kind of nursing, counseling, again, mental health counseling, any of those kind of things are going to fall under HIPAA compliance, where there's some kind of, provider benefit, healthcare related scenario. And so with that being the case, that means you would have EPHI, electronic healthcare data, in your environment, and therefore subject to HIPAA compliance. And with HIPAA compliance, there's two pieces. One's the high tech, which is really what we think of as security, information security, cybersecurity, and the other is the privacy and data breach element. Both are required compliance hurdles that need to be jumped over, and there's a lot of things in here. Now, and this one's got some real penalties to it as well, and the OCR is fairly aggressive. It kind of changes over time, but I think currently they're in a more aggressive mode. But going after organizations. Now, I'll tell you, the large healthcare corporations are probably more on their radar than colleges and universities, but that doesn't mean you won't be or can't be. One of the pieces of good news of changes recently is that the OCR went overly aggressive in trying to fine some organizations, and the dollar amounts got ridiculously high, and they were there's a lawsuits against it, and it was deemed that they were just being capricious. They did not have the authority to just start racking those dollar amounts up for no good reason. And so anyway, there have been some recent, within the last 2 or 3 years, changes to the penalty structure that make it more reasonable, more palatable. So that's one good thing that's happened. But HIPAA's changing a lot. There are usually changes to the HIPAA regulations at least every 2 or 3 years. Oop, all right, had too many keys waiting on. All right, not last one, but the PCI compliance, credit card security. So technically anyone taking credit cards, so this is really not industry specific, has requirements to protect the credit card data environment. And it doesn't matter if you're using a third-party processor, there are still requirements for how that can be done. So there are no scenarios where you have no PCI compliance requirements. If you take credit cards, you've got some requirements. Now they differ. There's a lot of variety depending on the methods you take credit card information, and actually navigating which requirements are applied is a challenge in itself. So the secret to PCI compliance is reducing your PCI scope. And that's usually where I think we provide a lot of value is, all right, you need to comply. You may have been doing these steps in the past, but let's take a fresh look at that and see if there's a better way to do it. Now, the penalty for PCI compliance or non-compliance is they could revoke your ability to take credit cards. I will tell you, that's how the credit card companies make their money, and they are loath to say you can't do credit cards anymore because they're shooting themselves in the foot. And I think over the years we've all seen some pretty high-profile credit card non-compliance breaches, and not once have they revoked those companies' ability to process credit cards. So that doesn't mean it's not important, but their biggest stick, I don't think is all that big. And then we've got NIST 800-171 CMMC. If you are an institution that has a lot of research grants or grants with not NASA or Department of Defense, you've probably got some CMMC requirements on top of that as well. All right, got another code word. I'll leave this on for about, 10 or 15 seconds. And then I'm going to move on. So I've kind of covered this already, so I'm going to skip right past this. But again, it's a variety of penalties and fines depending on the compliance. All right, so addressing compliance, and I'm gonna probably hit this one a little harder than some of the other strategies, but a risk assessment is a core information security program tool, not just for compliance purposes, but its purpose is to drive IT initiatives and support business objectives. So a risk assessment is crucial, and its purpose is to identify areas where the organization has the appropriate safeguards in place, and maybe we're good for now, and areas where nope, we need some improvements, and those improvements again drive initiatives. Now I'm going to get on my soapbox just for a little bit here, and I say be careful. I've seen some reports out there that say they are risk assessments, and they are not risk assessments. So I've had some difficult conversations trying to clear up that muddy water. So and I think Guy may have hit on this already or will, but vulnerability scans and penetration tests are an important part of your information security program. They are not risk assessments. Vulnerability scans and penetration tests assess assets and then assign risk levels to the vulnerabilities identified. So a vulnerability scan is an asset assessment. A risk assessment, just like the name implies, assesses risks to the overall environment. So again, I have seen some very well recognized companies issue a vulnerability scan and call it a risk assessment, and in a higher ed institution thought they were compliant when they were not. So again, it does far more disservice than a benefit they provided. All right, employee training. We cannot, I'll say, emphasize enough the importance of user training. Now, the threats are increasing faster than the quality of the training. So I just mentioned that now. This is an important area. We need to see some improvement in the industry, not your industry, but overall in the providers of training. It's effective, but it's starting to lose some of its effectiveness again because we're seeing AI attacks. These threats are looking so legit. Even the people who know what they're doing are potentially at risk of falling for some of these. Multi-factor authentication. We all probably grumble a little bit every time we have to log in and add an extra layer of information to get into our systems. But I will tell you, this alone has one of the biggest bang for the bucks when it comes to security protection than any other. Nowadays, it's a non-negotiable defense line that ought to be put into systems or into the environment. Incident response plans. All right. Yes, we want to do our best to protect an incident from occurring, but, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it's going to happen. Some of us are absolutely going to get hit. We've already been hit, so we need a plan in place to address how we're going to handle that, something organized. And I mentioned earlier, GLBA requires having this in place. And not just the plan, but some way to test it, which can be a tabletop exercise. And those are good opportunities to get executive leadership involved so if they understand, I'll say, the challenges that other areas in the organization face trying to deal with an incident. And then regular audits. So whether you've got an internal audit function or, again, some of these areas you have to have somebody come in, like GLBA, that's part of the single audit process. But it's good to have a third or second set of eyes looking at the environment just to make sure and prove that everything's working as everyone thinks it's working. And then I'll say this, and this is a little bit self-serving, maybe more than a little bit self-serving. We know that you are overburdened with normal work activities across the campus, all areas, all departments. Your resources are limited, funding is limited, and trying to deal with this is challenging and not easy, nor is there a quick, easy fix to it. So sometimes the answer is let's bring in resources that have invested that time already in understanding these compliance requirements and help us navigate those. So that's the benefit to partnering with someone who again, their job function is to stay up on all this, not yours. That's, if anybody's got that internally, usually it's their side hat they have to wear, and it's just difficult to prioritize it when that's the case. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Guy.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'll go quickly over the next few slides because I want to get into the case studies and make sure we have time for Q&A. But to echo what Kevin has said about the complexity and of having a comprehensive cybersecurity and compliance program, we work with institutions with a small IT team. It may be that the compliance aspect is handled outside of IT, it may be that IT has to deal with the security aspect, but not necessarily the compliance aspect. Also, in what Kevin has shown, there's a lot of overlap between the different compliance requirements. And so with expertise and experience, you can really be more efficient in how you address some of these requirements. Because starting from the risk assessment, being able to collect all of that information into a roadmap and helping through that roadmap is extremely important. So just very quickly about how we can help. The service that we have is what we call our Virtual Information Security and Compliance Office, which is basically the ability of having a liaison, and it could be, a virtual CISO, it could be a virtual compliance officer from our team who is going to be able to bring experts from Dean Dorton based on the specific program area that you need help with. So let's say, you have somebody on the team, they love the performing training, they love managing the training program, but they're not that great at writing policies and procedures. They're not that great at doing the risk assessment. Then we can certainly come in and complement this skill set. So this is extremely flexible. For some organization, we manage the entire program. For other organizations, it's more of a co-sourcing model or on a project by project. So let me try to go through that here. I can get this slide to move. Oh, yeah. So, from a governance perspective, we talked about the roadmap, but there's a few other components that I think are critical to provide some diligence, right? Maintaining a risk register, making sure that we have metrics, key performance indicators, that we can provide reports and dashboard to executive or the board on a regular basis to keep them apprised of not only the progress, but also the risk and the challenges. Risk assessment, Kevin already covered these. Compliance support as well, to show the complexity there. Training program, incident response. Unfortunately, that will happen. Institutions experience incident on a very, very regular basis. And we've seen too many instances where the incident has not been detected for months. And a lot of that has been taken. It's very challenging to go back and do the investigation and eradicate the threat. So from an incident response perspective, I'm a big proponent of being proactive, as Kevin mentioned, making sure that there's a plan, incident response plan, that we have playbooks that are specific to specific threats that are relevant. So if we have a malware, what are the steps that we need to take? If we have an email that is being compromised, what are the specific steps that we have to take to eradicate the threat actors, make sure it's contained, that we do the investigation and the report? So having specific playbooks that are relevant to your institution is extremely important. And also the training aspect. Doing incident response tabletop is like a muscle that you train. You have to do that over and over and over and involve the executive team, the legal team, the HR team, the public relation team, to be trained so that when something happens, then the organization is a bit more prepared to handle these issues. Oops, sorry. So here you go, Kevin. Kevin is going to cover some of the case studies that we really want to talk about, and then we should have a little bit of time for the Q&A after that.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. And I'm going to go through these next two slides pretty quickly because I want to get, I'll say to the positive ones. I'm glass half full. I'd rather talk about the positive side instead of the doom and gloom side. So we all know data breaches happen, and colleges and universities are a prime target. see. Do I have? Yeah, okay. This one, I'm not going to go into the details to save time. What I do want to mention is these are local. And I've removed the names to protect the guilty, but I'm fairly confident, or at least I think, some of the people who represent these institutions are on this call today. You know who you are. It's okay. They recovered, but you know, one of these scenarios, they weren't sure they weren't done as an institution, and barely managed to come out of it and you know, survive. So it's real and it's happening, you know, nearby. So now, I've got a code. I'll pause 10 seconds, give everybody an opportunity to put that number in. And now let's look at some of the positive changes that have been occurred. And we've gotten approval to use the names of these institutions. And so we have had a long, you know, wonderful relationship with Berea College over the years. And what I like about this slide is it gives you a real quick snapshot of how their compliance program has matured over the years. Now, I don't have a timeline, but you're looking at about a decade here. All right, this is not something that gets accomplished overnight. And these are all the areas, or at least the big ones, where we've helped Berea with over the years. Now, what I really like about this slide is that last bullet point. So remember how I told you earlier, I tell institutions, put GDPR at the bottom of the list. They made it, not that the list ends, okay? It may never end, but they made it to that point in their program where they were ready to tackle GDPR. So, and right now, with all the institutions we work with, they are unique in that realm. So again, when the timing is right, when the stars and the moon all align, again, it's not something that can be ignored forever. But they got to a point where they could, and have worked on GDPR compliance. But you can see all these other areas as well. Another one that we've worked with is Morehead State. And again, this goes back some years as well. There's a pretty long timeline here, but it's kind of broken out a little different. You know, every institution is a little different, and the way you tackle it, you know, can be tailored to the institution. And you can see here are some of the projects they did to help with the compliance area. See that data inventory. You know, that was a fairly involved process that had to do with identifying all the applications, storage locations, the type of data, and the type of compliance elements that were applicable to that data. And then here's just a list. I'd say these are some areas we've, you know, not countless, but a lot of higher ed institutions. These are the areas that we've helped with and been able to help these organizations improve their compliance program. All right. Hopefully I've given us a little bit of time to field some questions.
Yes, we've got about 3 minutes for questions. We've got our tech experts here. Get them while you can. It appears that the two of you have just, you know, blown everyone away and answered all of the questions. We'll keep you guys up here for another minute or two. If you advance the next slide, you'll get their contact information. So when you do have a question, you know how to reach them.
This is just oh, nice. There's a couple questions in the chat now, Julia. Do you see them?
I do. AI grabbing and using your voice is scary. Have there been any incidents reported around that?
Yes.
Around AI?
And using voice, using your own
grabbing.
voice or using your own image and likeness.
Absolutely. We're seeing that pretty often now, actually. The criminals are getting more and more sophisticated. And when they really want to target a specific institution and individual, they also try to spoof the phone number and do what's called SIM swapping. When they first trying to port the phone number, then they call using that phone number that you recognize using a fake voice, or the voice that the phone number used to belong. So this is absolutely a scam that is been going on. There's some information that has been released by the FBI warning organizations to stay vigilant. It is getting more and more widespread, absolutely.
We got another question that said, what cyber framework do you think is the best for higher education?
All right, I can feel that. So hands down, it's NIST 800-171. Multiple reasons. One being it's just so well recognized. It's a nice, moderate cyber framework. GLBA. Now, again, we heard in the first presentation today, changes at the Department of Education. So who knows now? But a few years ago, the Department of Education said they were moving to NIST 800-171. So that's the direction they intend to go. If you have any grants with the Department of Defense or NASA, again, 171 is the right one to go. And so all the other compliance requirements are just fine, even suggest 800-171. So it is, again, by far the safest, best route to go.
Well, we appreciate your insight. Megan, did you want to jump in here for a second?
Nope. I just wanted to say thank you to Kevin and Guy. Of course, keep their numbers close. Unfortunately, they're the ones that you call when something bad is gone. We don't like that as much. We like to talk to you before anything happens, before any incidents, but they're here if you do need them to help in a response as well. We are going on break until 3:40, so you've got about 9 minutes now, and we'll come back and have our last session of the day with me. See you guys soon. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope you got a quick break in and ready to finish up the day with me. I'm excited to spend the next hour or so talking through strategies and best practices for financial stability. So it should be a fun session we have left going here. In this session, we are going to use polling. So polling in addition to the code words. This is how you log into the polling. The code words are the most important thing to get your CPE. So the polling is separate, but would love to get some real-time feedback from everybody as we're going through. So you can dial 22333 on your phone, enter, send Dean Dorton as a message and then respond. You can join by QR code, or you can go on the internet and answer there. We'll continue on with the code words throughout as well. And so if you have any questions, let us know. Excited to get rolling here. So let's start with a test poll question for you guys. Just so I get to know you all a little bit better. How long have you been in higher education? 5 years or less, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 15, 15 to 20, or 20 plus? Well, this is great. We've got a nice mix of people here. Of course, the results continue to slide up and down, but I'm actually very excited to see that we have some people with 5 years or less. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but getting new, fresh ideas into higher education is always a good thing. And so seeing that there's a lot of people with less than 5 years of experience is exciting. For me, of course, we love to have the people with experience. Those are the ones that help keep things steady during, somewhat tumultuous times. So happy to see those people around as well. Hopefully everybody gets a little bit something out of the session today. I'd like to spend just a quick minute talking about our higher education team at Dean Dorton. We're made up of 30 or so people across all of our service lines: tax, audit, outsourced accounting. Kevin, you guys just met, is a key part of our IT group that helps us and advises us. As well as any of our other service lines. Everybody participates. We have a little bit of different perspective from each group, which is what we love. We are active leaders in the industry, and then of course we have significant experience around student financial aid, anything with the Department of Education, GLBA, and IT compliance, which Kevin and Guy just talked through. And we're here and happy to help you guys any way we can. We know that this is an interesting time, we'll call it. I think we used unprecedented a lot during COVID, but now it's interesting. And changes are coming every day, and we're happy to help walk step in step with you to help guide your institutions through this time. So our objectives today are to gain an understanding of strategic planning and financial management, review data-driven decision-making and enrollment management, and then discuss innovation and adaptability. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we continue through. We'll try to answer those as we see relevant or answer at the end. So what's going on? I think Liz kind of stole the show a little bit earlier, but it's every day there's a new headline, right? All talking about college closures, disruption, mergers. This is just a small sampling of all of the headlines that are out there. And I think this is important to understand because we have to understand what's going on now in order to be able to apply these concepts we're going to talk about later. Just a couple weeks ago, Penn State announced they're closing 7 of 19 campuses. That's a very big deal. They've seen a 40% enrollment decline since 2014. It affects about 3,200 students. And I think that's what's really at the point here is that these headlines are easy to read and be like, well, maybe we don't need that many colleges. Sure, maybe we don't. But you're also talking about there's actual students and employees behind those numbers of institutions that are closing. I looked up the St. Andrews, was just Googling more information about it. And it's really harsh on Google. It pops up and says permanently closed. I can't imagine as alumni sitting there saying, man, that's where my degree came from. That's really tough to see and hear. So we're gonna talk through this, but what we want to know is that, closures, we want to understand them over time and then understand how we don't become one of these statistics. This is a great chart I found. I'm talking about the number of closures back from 2008 through 2024. You can, of course, see the blue line is the private for-profits. So if we think back, so the people that have only been around 5 years, they probably don't know what happened in 2016. There was increased government scrutiny over the for-profit institutions. And so a lot of them closed. You all might remember all the ITT Tech campuses closing, et cetera. But then the orange line is the private nonprofits. And I think as you continue to see that line trends upwards, in general, much like trends do, but we start very low in 2008 and get much, much higher in 2024. Of course, this is after the recession of 2008. That's right when I was graduating college. And so we're seeing not just all great times, and now the times are a little tougher and schools are closing. We're seeing that trend consistently through all of the periods. There is a slight dip in 2020 and 2021. Of course, what do we know? COVID funding, right? COVID funding came out. The schools that could strategically use that are probably in a better place, and the schools that really needed it have limped along. And I think now that's why we're seeing that upswing in 2024. We're 5 months into 2025. Of course, we're at the end of the semester. And so schools are starting to announce that they're closing. The closures are happening now. There's been 5 closures in 2025 thus far. A handful of mergers, which means schools are, combining together. But what I think is most interesting, if you look at 2024 and 2025 statistics of all the colleges that have closed, the reason all of them have listed is financial or enrollment. I think it's interesting that they list financial or enrollment because we all know as accounting experts that those things go hand in hand. So how did we end up in this upswing of continued college closures? Well, here we go. Sorry, too far. Well, how did we get here? Well, it feels like to me like a science experiment. You remember back when you were a kid and you made the volcano with the baking soda and you put the vinegar in and then all of a sudden it was like all the things. I think that's what's really happened. Starting down on the bottom left-hand side, shrinking tuition income. We've heard the statistics that the enrollment cliff is coming, but we've already seen some of that from 2016 to 2022. 8% of seniors declined not go to college anymore. So of your graduating seniors, 8%, even though your population was fairly similar, decided not to go to college. So you're like, well, 8%, that's not too bad. Well, that totaled 2.5 million students, which is a big deal. And all of those students now are no longer paying tuition at any of the institutions. If you think also to escalating cost, the cost structure at universities is complicated. Operating costs are continuing to go up. I think we're seeing that even more now. Increases in just all the things it takes to operate. And your tuition revenue is not increasing at the same rate. If you start increasing your tuition revenue 10% at a time, what happens? I mean, that's what needs to happen in order for you guys to cover all your costs, but you'll lose students, which is the name of the game. Additionally, there's been, there's some not systematic multi-year impact. So it's easy in a time of tough financial times to say, hey, we're going to do a hiring freeze, or we're going to cut budgets, or something like that. But those are not multi-year strategies to control cost. And so we're continuing to see that. Federal funding up towards the top left and regulatory uncertainty on the top right. I think Liz just gave us a masterclass about an hour ago in what's going on there. They go hand in hand. I think as institutions, or at least as someone that works with you guys, it's hard to focus through the noise of all of the media reporting to really get to your mission and think about how is this impacting us? What do we need to do? How do we navigate through this? In mid-March, Moody's revised its outlook for higher education from stable to negative. So there's a lot going on there, just with, what's happening in the world and how's that impacting you. And it's not impacting every institution the same, but there are going to be trickle-down effects for every institution in both of those areas. At the very top is where I think the most interesting, it's just interesting to me, the value proposition to students. What do we know now? Get on your phone, you can learn anything. You're not stumbling onto something like we did back in the day, open an encyclopedia to read about turtles, and then all of a sudden next to it, you learn about tornadoes. It's not like that, but education and learning opportunities are endless. You can Google anything, you can use AI to find out anything. They can create it for you. And so the world is changing. And so education has still been fairly traditional. In the several years ago, you came to class, we taught you what you needed to become and do and all the things, and we sent you on your way. And now it needs to be education needs to become an area of lifelong learning. How are you teaching critical human skills, creativity, teamwork, collaboration? How do you teach those along with your curriculum to help a student be very successful in the world, no matter what they do? Getting an accounting degree is great. I love my accounting degree. But if someone likes their accounting degree but wants to do something else, are they taught the same skills in higher education on your campuses and seats that they can apply throughout any career they may want or any trajectory they may have? Moving on down, wanted to talk a little bit about, employment outcomes. Part of it goes back to the value proposition. How do we directly bridge the gap between your curriculum and what the labor market needs? So, how do we make sure that those things are working hand in hand and that students can be successful with a degree from your institution? And then lastly, there is the resistance to change. I think this is always an interesting conversation. Back pre-2020, what do we know? We could not possibly teach online. It just was not possible. It was not quality. The online courses were not something that we took pride in. Maybe you did. You were probably a forethinker on that. But it was really hard. And faculty didn't want to teach online. They felt the only way to teach was in the classroom. Bam, COVID hits, and all of a sudden, all that's thrown out the window. We can do all the things. We can teach online, we can do all things. But all that to say is that now we've gotten used to the other side. We've gotten used to the post-COVID world. And so are there things that we need to change even more or push for across the board, students, faculty, staff, et cetera, to help in decision making and to help them understand the university as a whole. Some of that is their decentralization of information. We'll dive into that a little bit more, but a faculty member likely no longer can just be a faculty member. And so thinking about that going forward. So you put all of those things together, and we're in this cyclone, kablow, whatever you want different punches, and changing the environment that we're in and trying to figure out our way through it. And so that's kind of what we're going to think about all of those as we continue through our presentation this afternoon. I think the Penn State president, Neeli Bendapudi, of course, I mentioned earlier, they're closing 7 or so campuses, which is a pretty big deal, 3,200 students. It's hitting all the headlines. But I think she summed up the last slide the best, and that she said, we cannot continue with business as usual. The challenges we face, declining enrollments, demographic shifts, financial pressures, they're not unique to Penn State, but they require us to make difficult choices. Across higher education, institutions are grappling with similar headwinds, and we have reached a moment where doing nothing is no longer an option. I think that's a great quote. It really does tell you, we're all facing it, and we've got to get through it, and we've got to get over it. But we cannot continue to do what we've been doing, and we need to be big thinkers and think about how we can change to meet that. An interesting statistic I've read too is that 41% of private nonprofits experience zero or negative growth in net assets between 2010 and 2023. So that's a big deal. For 13 years, private nonprofits, 41% of them did not add to their net assets or even took away from. And so if we continue on that trend, even that's going to add more headwinds to you and more inability to be able to meet the needs of your student and meet your mission. All right, so all that being said, President Bendapudi gave it to us best, right? We cannot do nothing. We can't do business as usual. And so what does that mean? This is the whole point of why we're here today. My goal is to remind you that you are a business. Oh, we have a code word. Sorry. We have a code word first. Spoiler alert. I'll leave this up for a second, and then we'll dive into talking about why you are a business and why it's so important. All right, we're going to move on here. So you are a business, right? And so that's the most important thing you can remember. Yes, it is critical that you remember that your goal is to educate students and that you have these missions and visions and all the things. But at the end of the day, those cannot outweigh the fact that you are a business. And without you having a business, if your business closes, you will not meet the mission or the mission to serve all those students. And you guys make huge impacts in your community. Without you, there's a hole. You employ lots of people. You set there's all sorts of research and studies saying the impact of institutions within their community. And so that it's critical that you guys are here and around and stay around forever. There's all of these items here. If we had a little dot in the middle, we would call that the business mindset. So your goal is to make all of these things swirl around together. You want to make sure that the circles in the middle, operational efficiency, financial stability, and sustainable growth, all are maintained through the use of engaging stakeholders, managing your resources effectively, and continuously innovating. If you can get all of these things, all 6 things on a very broad picture, moving in the same direction, I really do think institutions are unstoppable. And all of these are part of that business-like mindset and understanding. We don't want to become a statistic. We don't want to be the school that's on the closed listing or even that's, falling into the financial struggles. It makes it so much harder to do your jobs and to educate those students if you fall into that negative kind of headline situation. So here's where we're going to go from here. We've now understood why we don't want to close. We want to meet our mission. We want to continue on, but we want to remember that we are a business. And so what does that mean looking here on May 21st in 2025 and going forward? Some of you are going to be like, hey, we do all these. We're great. So my goal for you is to think about what is an area that you haven't been able to do this in, or an area that could use it. And if you're not doing any of these things, then we can have a very long conversation after our after the CPE to talk about, okay, how do we get you started and how do we get you moving on the right path? So these are the three concepts we're going to cover: strategic planning, data-driven decision-making, and then innovation and adaptability. All right, so first, another polling question. Do you feel that your institution has adopted a business-like mindset? Oh, I don't know who answered A first, but they're like, yes, we are in it. We know it. We love it. So maybe for those that answered A, I should just step away and let you guys teach the rest of the class, right? Of course, that's what you want. You want the business-like mindset. And I say business-like is because you still have a mission. Your goal is to educate students. So you're not going to make decisions necessarily like a for-profit business would, but you need to be thinking that way and then aligning your all of what you're doing with those things. So those that said somewhat, great. Those that said no and unsure, I would put you on a mission after this to find out what can we be doing? What can we implement to make us more of a business? All right, so in strategic planning, there's a couple different things we're going to talk about here: aligning mission and vision with business principles, strategic planning frameworks, and then financial management essentials. Of course, let's talk for a second about why is strategic planning so important. Not just a plan that sits there, but a plan that you're working through all the time. You're using it to guide your decisions. Often a strategic plan at least gives you a pathway to follow, and then it allows you to figure out how to operate efficiency within that. And the goal is that your strategic plan aligns your mission with your real world achievable goals. And not just administration, not just the executive cabinet, but everyone in the organization needs to be moving towards the same goal down the strategic plan highway of university life. So when we talk about aligning mission and vision with business principles, I think this is what's important, is that every decision in your strategic plan and every goal and every metric you set needs to work to align your mission and vision. Not having a clear voice or clear identity about what you are as an institution will end up failing you in the long term. Don't mishear. I do think there's a place for a liberal arts college. I think that's a great place to be. I think a lot of students need that. They need to figure out what they want to do. But you need to figure out how you, as a general liberal arts college, define yourself, set yourself apart, and what is your true path and your mission there. If you feel very good and you have your mission and vision already set, and how do you keep that? And does that mission and vision apply going forward? Does that still make sense? Going forward, times are changing very quickly, so we can't just rest on our laurels. It used to be that strategic plans were 5 to 10 years. I still think there's somewhat of a place for some very long-term 10-year goals, but my guess is that those need to be shortened to 3 to 5 years, or somewhere in there, or there needs to be a component of both, right? And so the whole goal is that you align everything to get in synergy and to get those business cycles that we talked about, that business-like mindset, all moving in the same direction. So strategic planning frameworks for sustainability and growth. These are kind of the areas where we see that you need to have in order to have a great strategic plan. These are proven across all sorts of organizations. Dean Dorton has a lot of these, most of these. The core values, of course, is something that we all know and can repeat in general. But your vision, again, your vision is, what do you want to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years? And then every decision and every step below there should fall into what is the vision and how in the mission, and how does all the other steps align there. The mission statement is much more succinct. I bet we could pull up any of your websites now and probably go type in and find the vision, mission statement. You guys could probably understand that. You guys are in decision-making positions in general. And so my question to you would be, of these next couple that we talked through, of do they align in there? Do you feel they align in there? And do you know how they align in there? Do you know that all your goals are moving the needle in that direction? And so a SWOT analysis is always helpful at the beginning of your strategic plan. What do you do well? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats? There's a lot of opportunity in the healthcare field. Does that make sense for your university? Can you have a healthcare program that makes sense, or are you going to be competing with a school just down the road that has a great financial model for some reason that you just can't meet their cost? So maybe that's not a good move for you. But thinking about those and thinking about not just you and not just your institution, but who are your competitors and where do things align outside of just you, and then think about you and in your environment. Of course, a SWOT analysis, that's that part. Core values we've talked about slightly. They're non-negotiable statements. They keep everyone involved in the institution. The goal is that students could repeat your core values, your faculty, your staff, everyone could repeat your core values. SMART goals, of course, are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. But I think the hardest part of those is measurable. And so really thinking through, how are we going to measure and how are we going to judge ourselves on these items within our strategic plan? We're going to talk more about what could help you in a little bit align your SMART goals. And then continuing down, objectives, those are more specific, and then action plans, again, more specific about how everything aligns. I think the biggest struggle always, or not always, but most of the time in higher education, is the struggle between viability and educational quality. And I think that's what we get from both sides of the house, right? Faculty and staff and education quality, it has to be there. You have to have a good education. That's your bread and butter. But how do you pair that with viability? So understanding that a professor could likely teach 15 students in the same way they could teach 20, and 20 helps you achieve financial viability. That's very important. It probably doesn't reduce your educational quality at all. So understanding that between and working through that is probably one of the biggest challenges you have. Next, so another polling question. Do you have a strategic plan in place, and are you actively working on it? So A is yes, I can tell you all the pillars of success. B is I know I have one, or we have one. I do not know. Is C, and D is we do not have one in place, or it is not updated. Okay, so that's great for those in A. You can answer, you can tell me, this is what I'm doing. These are how decisions I'm making align and are propelling our university forward. So that way we don't end up on Megan's list of closures when I present in a couple of years on this, right? So you guys are working to that. And I say the question is actively working on it. So if you can tell me all the pillars, that likely means that you're actively working on the strategic plan and everyone knows you're moving the ship in the same direction. Knowing you have one, that's good. That's great. But I think you need to know more. How do you learn enough to know that your decisions that you're helping impact are moving the ship to where it needs to go? For those that don't know, I wonder, could you fall into D, like the school doesn't have one, or is it you just don't know? So I would encourage everyone, again, if you're in those do not know, or I know we have one, to find out more. Ask, challenge up, ask what we're doing, understand where the institution is going. So that way you can be around for a long time. That's what you want, right? Or I know I would want, if I were at an institution, I would want to be able to say, hey, I've worked at this institution that's been around for 200 years and it'll be around for 200 more. My kids can go there, etc. And so I think knowing B and C are very important to be able to move the institution forward. I will go back to say, if you're in A, making sure that strategic plan is refreshed as needed or considers new factors upcoming is important. So don't just let it sit on the shelf and get dusty, even though you're working through it. Continue to move forward with it. All right, so let's talk about strategic plan and financial management. So this is one of our sub points we've kind of talked about. We're going to walk through financial management essentials, mainly talking about diversifying and properly managing your revenue streams and cost control strategies. So let's talk about, code word. They always surprise me. Code word right now, number 10. All right. So let's talk through diversifying and generating revenue. Of course, there's a couple different buckets here we need to think about because you guys are complex organizations and it takes all of these to work together to be successful. So your academic revenue, your partnership revenue, and then your auxiliary and facilities revenue. Of course, in your academic revenue, of course, tuition is your largest bucket there. And I would say that sometimes new programs aren't the best way to add academic revenue, but maintaining the students you currently have. How do you move the needle on retention? And hopefully moving the needle on retention is not increasing your discount rate. So working on all the things to make that academic revenue go up. Additionally, think about what programming needs to be added in. You know, are you thinking about in-demand things like data analytics, cybersecurity, degree completion programs? You know, the people that are close. What do you have that helps them through? Do you make it easy for them? Do you make it easy for transfer credits to come into your university? Because people have a lot of options there. Other smaller areas you could think about in academic revenue could be test prep courses, retiree courses, etc. I don't think those would individually move the needle, but they could. They very much could. The next one is partnerships. Partnership revenue, you know, thinking about local businesses and other academic institutions. How can you partner together with anyone? And don't limit yourself to those, but how do you partner together to make it make sense? Do you have a large employer in the area? What are you doing to make sure that relationship works? And not just we're hiring your students, but how are you developing your curriculum to help them be prepared for that job or any job in the future? Other academic institutions, you know, do you have a school that already has a great program of X? Great. Is there a program that you could offer in tandem or something that makes sense for you both in order to make it even a better program? So something to think about along those lines. When you start to think about auxiliaries, these are the ones that I think get a little crazy. But, you know, the biggest one is to think about utilization. How are your facilities being utilized? You know, are there open classrooms that could be used? Could you schedule differently to make sure rooms are being used more efficiently? Can you do all sorts of things? Could you add cell phone towers? That would be interesting. I mean, there's cranes up on campuses. There's all sorts of things. Why not a tower? You know, or maybe you're in a more windy spot, you know, windmills or something along those lines. Can you have working partnerships? You know, do you have a local business that could use a lot of space on campus? Of course, most people I think at this point have already done long-term dining. But if you don't have a dining contract, that could be something to consider, at least inflow some cash early on. I think what's important here is that you're looking at what you already have and seeing what you can make better. But then you're also looking at what other institutions, who are your peers, who has done something creative and unique that you think you could apply at your institution to really kick things off. You know, Liz talked a little bit about the lack of funding or decreased funding. In Kentucky, funding for higher education has dropped about 25% since 2008. That's a pretty big number. You guys have not been able to overcome that very easily. North Carolina is 17, Mississippi. I was just looking at the states that we mainly have on this call. Mississippi's 33, Ohio's 20, and then Arizona's 54. So you guys have had, we talked back about that quote with headwinds. You guys have been facing these headwinds for a while. So figuring out how, man, if we could just get around this turn, could we be with the wind, would be huge. All right, so let's talk about some cost-cutting strategies. So here's what I think interesting is that rarely has any business become a success by cost-cutting alone. Additionally, most of you are probably sitting here like, we are thin. We have cut, we have changed, we have reorged, we've done all the things, and that's true. And so you're going to have to be creative about your cost control strategies. So I think the first one, of course, we are in the middle of a digital transformation, leveraging technology. I'm not asking you to go out and get the newest, coolest tool that costs a ton of money. I'm asking you to think basic. How do we reduce paper and how do we reduce manual processes? You know, can you get rid of a person? We don't want to, but could you if you implemented this system or did this change or used analysis along that way. Optimize staffing, again, workforce management. Do you have a database of all the staffing requirements based upon your classes and your class sizes? Do you have a break-even point for all of your classes and sections? Is it, sure, we want to offer that class in that section, but if you have a bunch of classes that aren't at break-even, maybe you need to think about how to consolidate those, or reinvent the wheel, or, add faculty workload or something along those lines. Number 3 could be consolidating operations. How do you reduce duplicates? What are we all doing that would benefit from economies of scale? The easiest one is procurement offices. Most of you probably have one, but that is a good way to think about how can you share admin expenses. Same thing, if you're a small institution and a lot of people are ordering on Amazon, that's probably not the most effective way to spend your money. It might be very efficient. The supplies might come in a day or two, depending on where you are. They might come the same day. But is that efficient? Is that where you can really grab your costs? And again, these aren't huge things, but things to think about that could lead to more savings. Talking about energy costs, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but how are you efficiently using your classrooms? How are you saving on costs? Is it better to stack classes back to back to back and later into the evening and save a day of not having to, leave the lights on, etc.? Now, does one building make a difference? Maybe not. But are there multiple buildings? You add that up and all of a sudden you're seeing some change? Maybe. We've talked a little bit about procurement. Again, part of that is with the potentially leveraging technology or consolidating operations. If you're a small school, maybe you don't have the procurement thing. Maybe you can get into a consortium or something along those lines to help you with procurement. Financial aid management, how are you making it the easiest for students? So it's under a cost control strategy, but if it's a manual process your students are having to go through, they're likely to just not work through it, right? They don't want to meet any challenges. They want to make it easy. So how do you make it the most beneficial for them? And does that allow you to streamline your operations as well? So can you reduce the task or the stops for the students to increase your service? Think about those. And then of course your KPIs. Most schools have them, but it should be something that you're measuring continuous improvement, monthly, annual check-ins, and then on-time corrective actions. So I think that's the best thing about key performance indicators. The quicker we can get through information, the quicker we can make decisions, the better off we are typically. So speaking of KPIs, let's move on to data-driven decision-making, which is another key concept of running your school like a business. With data-driven decision-making, the information is factual. There's one source of truth, and that is very important. So we're no longer relying on the gut of someone. Now, it's important. A lot of you 20 plus years, 15 plus years, you've got a lot of that feeling, but what about if your feeling in this modern day world does not align with the facts? And so you continue to do something without data. That's the power of data-driven decision-making. It can help you identify trends and projections and then empower your people. Of course, the most important part here is understanding that you have verifiable and reliable data and one source of truth. That can take some time. That can be hard. But there are experts out there, including some of our team, that can help you get there. For example, if you were making a data-driven decision process, you could look at enrollment trends for a specific department. Okay, what professor always has the biggest enrollments? Is it because of the time of day? Is it because they're a great professor? How do we get more students in there so they have a higher satisfaction, likely greater retention? How does data help you reevaluate curriculum? Or can you get rid of classes? Can you put stuff together into 2 classes? Put 2 classes into 1. Can you combine them to make it more efficient and effective? You can also use insights to inform policies, resource allocation, and then again, all of this should be aligning towards your strategic goals. So if the strategic goals are, we want to do X, how are all of the steps along the way, all of the classes, all the data you are putting there, helping move that needle and get in line? Again, I think this not only is it student data, you guys are data rich. You have a lot of data. You might be information poor, but you have a lot of potential out there to be able to utilize these and understand, okay, what is helping us move along? Is that the nursing program is so great because everybody's getting hired afterwards? Is it because they have great professors? Why do they have great professors? Oh, because we've set their classes like this and it makes the most sense. So how can you analyze those trends and understand those overall? Again, data-driven decision-making helps you break down silos. You have one language, it validates your gut. It offers consistency. You do have to provide freedom to access the data to make data-driven decisions. So the accounting office cannot be the only ones with the information. How are you getting it out to help others manage? Earlier we talked about empowering the people, or I mentioned we were going to talk about empowering the people. Part of that data-driven decisions is being able to give the information to the right people so they can make the right decisions. So we'll talk about that more, about how your deans and provosts might use it. But it's something to think about there. Again, speed is important. An audit is great. I love coming to talk to you guys. I love coming to talk to your board. We're several months in arrears from your year end. You're already into the next year, maybe halfway into the next year before we're done and ready to present. And so making decisions based upon information that I can give you, which I'm happy to do and happy to help with, but that doesn't help you in make speed decisions and move quickly and be nimble and agile. Again, it can also help you establish predictive practices, retain students. You can look and say, okay, yes, in general, the students we get and keep are the ones that log in May when they've sent in their deposit and they're a year ahead and they've booked their housing and all that. You see some of that now, and I know I've had conversations with people on campus, but how can you intervene? How can you use data that, oh my gosh, all of a sudden these students, they haven't swiped their meal card in a while, they haven't done this. How can you use that to intervene to retain the students you have? And then of course it can help you streamline your processes. We've talked a lot about that. All right, another polling question here. How often is your institution using data to make decisions? Okay, good. This is great. All of the time. Some of the time, rarely. Good. I'm glad no one said never, of course. You're 4% rarely. Let's figure out how to get you guys there. You're all the times. I have a question. I have another polling question coming up in a little bit, and I would love for you guys to be thinking about it now, about what is your most important metric you're using. And same thing for you some of the time, people, just so that we can talk through that. All right, so now that we've talked about how important it is, how are you leveraging data? So once you have it, again, we've talked about it, you're strategizing based upon facts. So you can decide how you're prioritizing funding. What's the cost benefit analysis? If you add a section, what does that mean? How much do you have to add salary or not? You can make metrics to understand. It does also allow you to measure your SMART goals. We talked about that. They're important. The most important part of your goals, in my opinion, is that they are measurable. How are you meeting the requirements of them? Data often can help you understand those. Talking about the at-risk students, how are you intervening earlier? How are you keeping them? How are you retaining students in which programs? I think too, with succession planning, you could take your data and say, okay, the average age of the history department is X. What is our plan from here? Oh, and 3 of those people are key. That's what we've looked at the student information. They've all said we're history majors because of these 3 professors, and they're all retiring in 3 years. What is our plan? Is the history program just going to go kaput? Maybe. So thinking about that. Also, I think it could help with average age of your administrators or your accounting office. Let's think about that. Walk into an accounting office, there's not usually a ton of new young people in there. Not only that, it's getting harder to recruit people into higher education, which is a cost issue because you're getting fewer people to apply for your jobs. They're often requiring a higher salary. And that's, if you're doing that across the board, one person in every department, how are you keeping things fair for the continuing on people? And so understanding succession planning with all that data can help. Again, it can also help you optimize your resources, workload management, and understand your program effectiveness. Another code word for you. We have just a few minutes left, about 9 minutes left, and we're gonna keep going here and talk through kind of more of that empowering the people. So when you start to think about your deans and provost, do they understand? Maybe they do. I would say outside of the business department, we'll give them a slight benefit of the doubt, but do they understand what it costs to have a section? Do they understand what and how the professors are their classes making money or losing money? Of course, there is some of the assumptions of, well, they teach a accounting 200 to all of the students, all the business majors, even those that aren't accountants. There are some of those general ed classes you have to consider, but if the deans and provosts could all of a sudden understand when students are enrolling in school, when they're, what their classes are looking like, can they understand that, oh, we can make more effective decisions this way than other ways? Can they approve purchases based upon more than just this is what you've been allocated in your budget? Can they understand those things earlier in the process? Evaluating teaching effectiveness is important. What is most effective? What is most effective in those programs? Is it an online course makes the most sense? Oh, sorry. Is it that an online course makes the most sense and maybe does save you costs? Does it make no sense that it's an online course? Because while the students are learning, it's not effective. They're coming out and you're seeing that, oh yes, the students that came out of this degree with these classes online, not in person, they're not successful. They're not getting jobs, etc. We've talked a lot about streamlining operations, but can it help identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies? Can you reduce administrative workloads? Is there something that your administrators or even admin people are doing that all of a sudden, if you took that manual task away, they could be doing other things like helping serve students when they walk in the door? Maybe they don't have all the expertise they need, but is that something where they could at least have a more personal connection with them? Again, managing enrollments, tracking factors, influencing college selection, financial aid optimization, those are all very important. And then outcome focused curriculums, last one here. Analytics can help reveal skills pathways and competencies demanded by most employers. So if you have large employers in your area, maybe understanding those things can help you tailor at least some of your curriculum to help your students get jobs. And then it's a win-win, because if your students are prepared and you get good students there, then what happens? Oh, people that work at that company might tell their coworkers, hey, yeah, I got a great degree at pick your university and it's a great program and they really prepare you for this job. And so therefore they encourage their students to attend, and then you get the cycle going overall. All right, so here's where it's up to you again. I'd love to see great answers on this of what is your most useful metric your institution has started using. Employee turn. I think that, I don't know if that's different or the same, employee turnover, or if it's just turnover. Okay, they're separate. So yeah, understanding those, what causes the turnover? Is it because there's too much to do and not enough people? How can you add data in to help with that? Enrollment. I mean, I think there's so many things out there that you can understand enrollment and see that, understanding that also help you understand your discount rate and keep that in check. Licensing is a great one. Oh, they're all moving every time I go to look at it. EBITDA per student, you're exactly right on that. That's a great one to understand. Okay, what does a student cost? And then I don't know what the child one is, but I would be interested to hear more. But understanding, if you sitting here looking at these are just small. This is the most useful one that everybody's seen. Of course, enrollment, we knew that one was coming. That is a big one overall. We expect to continue to see that. But think about the mindset you've taken with enrollment. Everyone has said the most important thing we have is students. The most important thing we have is we retain them. And that's absolutely right. But how do you take that same mindset of here's how we're managing enrollment and applying same concepts to other areas the data is also available? Those are great answers. I'm happy to see people are working through it. All right, so kind of lastly here is innovation and adaptability. I think that's what's so great about college campuses is that a lot of time there is a lot of innovation, but we must adapt and change. So what are the novel ideas that are propelling your campus forward? You know, the people that are leading the institution likely have a different mindset than the students coming in. And so how can you bridge that gap and help novel ideas meet the needs of both, right? How are you encouraging innovation in academic programs and operations? You know, are you listening to people? I'll never forget, I attended a conference, and this was the smallest example, but they said they were, for some reason, using a lot of paper towels. I don't know how it came up, but the janitor, the custodian said, hey, when the paper towel thing spits out, you know, an 8-inch paper towel, people use one. When it spits out a 5 or 6-inch one, they use two. So if you would just if you would just set the paper towel things to go a little longer, you know, that would save us, if you think about all the people using paper towels, could be something much more efficient. So, you know, they had to have a listening session to understand that. And I'm not saying that's going to save the world, but if you start to encourage a climate that encourages people to innovate and bring forward ideas, good, bad, or whatever, you've got to listen to them all. But can you find nuggets that could help propel you forward? You know, can you use AI to increase efficiency? You know, how do you get the transfer credits? How can you analyze those quickly to say, yep, you're in. We've looked at your credits, you're good to go, and they count. You know, they count towards your degree here. And then what is the inflection point between online learning and student engagement and connectivity? So how are you using these incredible tools that often bring the education and the mission you're doing, you know, to students where they are, but how do you also get them engaged and get them connected so that way they are proud members of your institution and really, you know, seeing your credits going forward? We've covered a lot. I think my biggest point here is that you don't want to be like the slides at the beginning. And you don't have to be all of the things through the end, but to keep focused that you are a business, you want to be here to educate students in the long term. You are helpful to employers like Dean Dorton, giving us great students coming out, of course, not just in the accounting degrees, but across the degrees. And so there is a cycle here that makes it great for everybody. And to figure out how you overcome these barriers and how you overcome these struggles to really be here in the long term and help your community, your state, and even the United States as an overall continue to propel forward and be here for the long term. We don't have much time left. I'm happy to answer any questions. I haven't seen any pop into the box.
None yet.
Well, I do want to, if any come in, we'll answer them, but do want to thank everybody for joining us today. Of course, we're happy at Dean Dorton to answer any of your questions along the way, and hope you're signed up to get our newsletters and all of the other things that we put out. This is a tumultuous time, so we're happy to help any way we can and walk alongside of you and help you really achieve that mission and vision like we've talked about. You will be getting a survey after. It's not spam. We appreciate the feedback, and oftentimes the feedback you give us on the survey helps us plan topics for our next sessions going forward. So appreciate any insights you have there and appreciate everybody joining today.
Thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget to sign out, and you will be getting your certificates within the next 2 weeks. Thank you so much, Megan. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.